Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching first part of What If Naruto Travel Back in Time for Hinata. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Naruto took a breath. The air in Konoha was something he always cherished. It must have been the trees, as thousands of leaves brought in fresh oxygen each day. Every few seconds, breezes blew by, carrying the aroma of steam and soap from the bathhouses or food from a restaurant and the people. Hinata used a different, flowery, sweet-smelling shampoo, while Sakura used a fruity, cherry-scented one. He smelled faint traces of a subtle cologne that would likely appeal to any woman who approached him during the few times Jiraiya had hugged him. Kakashi had a dog-like scent. After that afternoon's alarm, Konoha was calming down. Restaurants opened and streetlights came on. Perhaps it would just be Kakashi, Asuma, and Guy, but he pictured the Junin sensei getting together for drinks to discuss the students they would be assigned since the three were close. Kurenai's relationship with Asuma did not automatically imply that she was a member of the group in any case. She had always come across to Naruto as a very feminine woman, and it's unlikely that she would attempt to participate in Guy time. While Mizuki was cooling his heels in a cell somewhere in Konoha's T&I, Iruka was enjoying his evening at home, blissfully unhurt, and thinking about his students' peculiarity for different reasons. Neither had been overly thrilled with Naruto's dramatic revelation. "Of course I knew, you dumb traitor. We're not best friends, but the fox and I share a body. What kind of idiot doesn't know there are two people inside him? For starters, he could now sit calmly in one of the training fields, tease Kurama's chakra enough to get the fox to come out of its self-induced hibernation, which is standard if your host is unaware of your existence. Otherwise, the silence would drive anyone insane, and take in the cool, clean Konoha air." Even though he had gained a great deal of distrust, for the time being, everyone was still on his side. If he had figured this out, he ought to have been going to the Hokage to discuss it. If he truly knew what he was doing, he wouldn't have been acting like such a fool, or at the very least, he shouldn't have been acting that way in front of the Hokage and his teachers. Fortunately, the Mizuki incident was sufficient evidence that not everyone in Konoha was looking out for his best interests. The sound of soft footsteps was effectively muffled by the swishing leaves above the field, but he had been on guard from the start and turned to find his main purpose for being here. Hinata was a natural tracker and was skilled at remaining invisible, but not quite at the level he was accustomed to, so even he could easily see her jacket's faded tan. He saw her tense, about to bolt and act as though she hadn't been there, but she cautiously entered the clearing. "Hinata?" he asked. Although the woman he knew had not been gregarious, she had undoubtedly become more confident and less restless. Although he was aware that he had been around Sakura's height at 12, Hinata was significantly shorter than both of them, and he had not truly recognized how small she had been when they were genin. Perhaps the jacket was the cause. He settled down where he had been before, leaning back and observing the treetops in an attempt to relieve her of the pressure. "Hey, how've ya been? Wanna sit with me? The stars are about to come out." At the moment, she wasn't very skilled with it. She hesitantly sat down next to him and alternated between staring at his face and the ground, never really looking for the lights. "Oh, okay," she said. He noticed her eyes lingering on his forehead protector and asked, "Why, you passed the exam?" He said, "Yeah," in a low voice. He had no idea how to approach her otherwise, so it was a great blessing that she had discovered him. Her voice was quiet as she asked, "Are you all right, Naruto?" Even when she looked away, he continued to look into her face and asked, "Can I tell you something?" He saw her eyes enlarge and saw her further hunch over. "I've kinda been lying to everyone. Nobody enjoyed hearing that their hero wasn't real." The stars were now actually emerging, blinking hellos from behind the tree branches, and he continued, "See, when the fourth defeated the Kyuubi, he didn't really kill it, he just sealed it into me." Hinata was motionless and gazing at him with wide, pearly eyes. How can that?" "Lots of countries do it," he said. "It gives them weapons, makes one more strong ninja, or makes sure that tailed beast can't be used against them. The difference here is that the people of Konoha really hate the Kyuubi, so they don't like me too much, either." Oh, she was practicing ignoring him, and he could see it. "At first I was just really mad at the fox, you know," he replied, turning to her, "but I'm guessing the fox didn't really want to be sealed into me, so that's kinda pointless. But then I started thinking, if people avoid me just as is, then if I actually seemed like I knew what I was doing, then..." She finished for him, staring into his white eyes. They might become afraid. He knew this girl, Hinata, who was intelligent, cautious, and capable. "Yeah." She sounded hurt and said, "You've been failing the exams on purpose?" "Most of them, but, you know, I figure even if I do fail, I'll just get up and try again, right?" He laughed and observed her return a tiny smile. "I'm gonna be Hokage no matter what. A few stupid tests won't stop me." And there it was. Hinata didn't smile. but when she did, her entire face seemed to light up. Naruto enjoyed acting on impulse, particularly in situations like this. She squeaked in surprise as he leaned in to kiss her. A faint image of a red-faced Hinata appeared on the ground a few seconds later. Naruto looked back up at the heavens. He took a breath. Naruto moved closer, found Hinata's hand, and took it, causing her to flush. A smile split his face at the seams at her gentle squeeze, and she appeared to enjoy it, smiling while avoiding eye contact. Students were chatting excitedly around him. The 8 he specifically targeted were acting as he had predicted. Shikamaru and Choji were sitting quietly, one eating chips and the other watching Ino. Kiba was distracted by Akamaru. Shino was watching the group. Sasuke was ignoring everyone, and Sakura and Ino were fighting naturally. Hinata was seated next to him and was beaming with joy. Naruto said, "I think you'll be with Kiba," in a low voice so as not to attract attention. "Why do you think so?" she asked, turning to face him. "He's an Inuzuka, so he's probably going to be a tracker. Konoha doesn't have too many teams for that. With your Byakugan, you'd be able to help each other sufficiently. Another good candidate would be." He appeared to be looking around. Shino, his bugs would also work for tracking. He could tell she wasn't excited, so he asked, "You think I'm a tracker?" Neji's combat team and the spying he knew Hanabi would be destined for were more glamorous than tracking. "You're really good at it. You've been following me around for a few months now, haven't you? Sometimes it's hard to tell if you're there." He laughed. With a flush of shame, she said, "Sorry, I don't mean." He allowed her to nod, relieved that she had removed it. "Nah, it's fine," he said. "It's just like a training exercise, right?" Though his gaze strayed to the 2 girls fighting over the chair next to the Uchiha, he said, "I don't think he'd be too surprised at that. I could only imagine what Sasuke would say if he found someone spying on him." Hinata laughed, surprised. "I know that it's a bit weird, but I admire Sakura and Ino's courage to say things like that out loud." Naruto sighed. "Out loud's well and good, but we're ninja. We're supposed to be subtle, aren't we?" With a little chuckle, she startled him once more and said, "Not everyone can be as subtle as you, Naruto-kun. If everyone took that route, we wouldn't get anywhere." Rewarding her momentary bravery, he squeezed her hand and said, "I think I'm doing just fine." Which caused him to blush once more, forcing him to scan the room. Shortly after, Iruka entered, looking shocked to see Naruto holding the Hyuga girl's hand while tapping a clipboard with a pen. However, he persisted and distributed the team's tasks. Though she appeared willing to try, Hinata appeared resigned to tracking. Naruto's gaze shifted to the pink-haired fangirl and the Avenger, who was purposefully maintaining his gaze on a small area of the floor to Iruka's right. Sakura was waiting for him to glare at him and appeared taken aback to see him with Hinata. She ignored the thumbs up and smile he gave her. Hinata's teammates were prepared to try Team 8, so Naruto left them to it. It was pointless to try a team lunch with Sasuke and Sakura this early on, but before he left, he gave Hinata a peck on the cheek in front of both boys, which, he was proud to say, only left her swaying on her feet and not actually passed out. Finding something to read while he waited for Kakashi was now the only task left to complete. He took a leisurely walk home to pick up the gutsy ninja, and then he sat down beside Hinata in the classroom. "Our sensei's chronically late. This is to read while we wait for him. Have you read it?" He smiled at her inquisitive look. He dutifully opened it to the first page after she shook her head, scooting until his entire left side was pressed against her entire right. He asked her if she was finished with the page, then turned it while stroking his thumb over her knuckles or drumming his fingers against hers, all the while pretending not to notice her furious blush. After a while, Hinata took over the responsibility of turning the pages, but he had to interrupt her once, saying, "Geez, Hinata-chan, I can't read that fast," to bring a little more conversation to the reading session when it appeared she was more interested in the book than in him. This was, for all practical purposes, a date in front of their whole class at the academy. Hinata knew that he was one of the best ways to overcome his meekness, which needed to be overcome at this pace. She should be able to stare Neji down as effectively as he could by the time the Chunin exams arrived. Kurenai, however, arrived too soon to pick up her genin and once more wished her luck by kissing her cheek. But this time, there was more to see than a silent Shino and a smirking Kiba. Shikamaru was observing from the corner of his eye. Sakura and Ino were both furrowing their brows, and Kurenai was giving them a cold, calculating red look. Hinata would have to defend herself if the Junin sensei brought it up, or she would have to defend the fact that she was exempt once more. He silently wished her luck. When Team 7 was left alone after a group of people with a child wearing a bandana had been gathered, Sakura approached him to inquire about his relationship with Hinata. "I hope so," he said, grinning at her, "but I'm not sure. Girls are confusing." He pouted. His acting abilities were sufficient to fool a schoolgirl, but they weren't as good as those of someone with a Sharingan. Sasuke was the exception. He just sucked. Sakura appeared to accept his bewilderment quite well. I think you are the important thing is to make a good impression. Ditch the jumpsuit, she said. A bit too tactful and too different from the dead last, he scowled and said, thanks, Sakura, but I'll ask if I need advice. Neither genin appeared to notice in any case. He intended for Team 7 to see the thoughtful Naruto. The more extreme side could wait until pressure, but he should show more of himself. He left the two of them to stew and went back to his book. There was no eraser to drop on Kakashi's head when he walked in, but he was met with two savage glares and a disinterested look at a book. My first impression is, I hate you. Meet me on the roof. Sakura stumbled after their teacher as Sasuke leapt out the window with grace and followed him using handholds in an attempt to stand out. Naruto hurried up the stairs and encountered 3 disapproving looks upon reaching the top. Kakashi questioned, are you going to make your teammates wait? I figured you wouldn't mind so much, he replied, since you were so late and, anyway, what do we have stairs for if all we're going to do is hop around outside? Well, then, my name's Kakashi Hitaki. I have many likes and dislikes, my dreams and goals are none of your business, and I think that's about it. Next, Kakashi said, returning his focus to the team. She blushed as she looked at Sasuke and said, well, I'm Sakura Haruno. I like my dreams for the future. She blushed once more, burying her face in her hands and laughing. After observing Kakashi's perspiration, Naruto coughed. Well, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I like ramen, being a ninja, and Hinata-chan. I don't like washing dishes or shopping, and my dream. He stopped saying anything like that would come across as a little obsessive, but Hinata was the main reason he was here. He turned to Sasuke, knowing that Kakashi was storing his easygoing demeanor for later. Guess I want to make Konoha the best it can be? He shrugged. I'm 12, gimme a while to think about it. Sasuke continued to glare at the ground without turning to face any of them. I don't have a lot of likes. In fact, I hate many things. My ambition, because it will be achieved, is to kill a certain man. Knowing that Kakashi was observing their responses, Naruto allowed a doubtful look to appear on his face. A 12-year-old's vow was not something this Naruto was going to take seriously. All of them were instructed to skip dinner and to arrive at their assigned training field early the following day. This gave Naruto enough time to get a discount on a small box of cinnamon rolls and hinge into a busty redhead. It might be time to start their first makeout session, depending on how well Hinata introduced her team. Last night, Naruto invited Hinata to his house, which was probably a little suspicious, but everything ended up going pretty well given how little Konoha and the Hyuga paid their children, especially Hinata. The girl was sleeping happily in his bed, still a virgin, and he was attempting to make pancakes. The Hyuga were probably unaware of this. Eggs, potatoes, and boxed dinners seemed to be made in a frying pan, so anything that involved a skillet was usually simple for him to prepare. But that was not the case with pancakes. Fortunately, Hinata's appearance stopped him from hissing oaths at the fourth nearly black one. She picked up the spatula at his request, and before she knew it, a tower of flawless, fluffy, flat cakes was growing to her left. Naruto's already amazing mood was only enhanced by her pouting and mumbling about beginner's luck. Though Naruto knew they would also be meeting with the copy nin at 9, they only shared a few kisses after breakfast before Hinata left for home to change, and Naruto went to training field 7 to finish the gutsy ninja. Kurenai and Kakashi were instructed to meet at 9 in the morning and 6:30, respectively. When Sakura angrily questioned him about why he was an hour and a half late, he simply shrugged and pointed to the deserted field. You see Sensei around anywhere? She asked. Eventually, however, Kakashi arrived with his bells and boxed lunches, gleefully shattering any hopes the young genin might have had of persevering as a team. He hoped so. Naruto didn't really allow anyone to see the smile that appeared on his face. However, in this instance, it was helpful because it typically made them feel as though they didn't know much about Naruto, which was exactly what he desired. Sakura and Sasuke were both fascinated by the abrupt departure from the norm. The Avenger grudgingly swallowed it in short bursts, while the girl devoured his explanation that teamwork was the solution. Kakashi said threateningly, "Just what do you think you are doing?" Laughed, "They're eating lunch. I didn't follow your bogus no breakfast rule, but they were trusting enough to, so while I distracted you, they got their strength back. Now we're ready to kick your one-eyed butt as a team." Although Kakashi appeared to be struggling to decide whether they passed or not, they did, and Naruto was encouraged by the shocked expressions the other two genin gave him. It would be better if they started treating him seriously now rather than later, when Sasuke's next defect could be dangerous. Being awakened from his sleep did not make the fox happy. What could possibly pique the interest of a gangly preteen? Many lots and lots. Kurama was drooling over the idea of getting even with Madara, or Obito, and Naruto was happy to oblige. There was a sense of excitement in the air, despite the fact that both of them knew they needed to exercise patience, wait patiently, and carefully consider their options good or bad. The wave mission was the first event in which the 9 tails would be involved, and that was sufficient for the chakra beast for the time being. Kurama went back to sleep, promising to fight during the next month. At this point, Hinata was a fighter with good intentions but little use, which was awful. She was far ahead of the game. As a tracker, the Hyuga would have learned that Hinata had a gift for staying hidden and seeing what people were doing their best to conceal if they had ever been interested in anything other than her fighting prowess. That was obvious with Byakugan, of course, but it went beyond that. Tiny scratches from ninja sandals, dilation of the pupils, and the way a woman's legs crossed at a table. Ninja knew to never take things that people could dismiss as coincidence as such. Hinata's progress with Team 8 didn't concern Naruto. Since they were being specifically trained to track, she would get along with them better than fine. However, this kind of specification left little time for fighting. It was assumed that each member practiced outside of lessons in addition to their Junin sensei, so it made sense to have sporadic combat assessments rather than intensive training. However, Hinata would have practiced with the Hyuga clan without any support and most definitely without utilizing her innate abilities. Thus, as he ducked a senbon, Naruto reasoned that he too needed to step in. He felt a sting somewhere in his left pectoral muscle after another senbon struck him close to the collarbone. She was becoming quite proficient with those. Probably it was time to go on. Naruto kept up his thoughtful persona during training, typically suggesting different, and sometimes gory, strategies to win when Kakashi had them working on something other than fighting. Even though Sakura was typically the one who planned during D ranks, the Sasuke still looked at him and expected him to speak when that one arose. He thought about pursuing Tora more violently, but he changed his mind because he assumed the Hokage didn't need to see him acting malevolently after the whole Kyuubi thing was thrown into the air. In addition to his daily struggles, he struggled with the decision of whether or not to disclose his Jinchuriki status to his team to make the team stronger. Or would it cause awkwardness? After Wave, perhaps after they had witnessed the power of the 9 tails chakra. Normally, Hinata's blushes were a little annoying because they reminded him that she was much shyer than she actually was, but he wasn't complaining too much given the situation. As it happened, she wore a tank top underneath her jacket today, which left a lot of skin exposed for him to leave hickeys on after the jacket was taken off. She took it well, even though he could feel her becoming a little panicked once his mouth lowered. He mainly kept his teeth on her neck and collar, leaving only a tiny red mark where her breast started. The fact that her mouth touched his neck particularly pleased him. Though she only gave gentle bites and wasn't quite as forceful as he was, she did make an impressive mark on his neck while motivated by words like, "Whoa, Hinata," and encouraging noises. Her hands getting under his shirt was what really excited him, even though they didn't usually like his boxers. The sound of her nails brushing against his hips was as distracting as he remembered he found a bruise on his back from picking her up and settling into a more comfortable sitting position against a tree because it was so distracting. Why did he decide to do this in a park when he had a couch? He also reluctantly acknowledged that he enjoyed the cool down period because it was usually enjoyable to cuddle with Hinata. He would play rock paper scissors or thumb wrestle, talk about the day, and discover ticklish spots he was unaware she had. She opened up quite nicely. As a result, he had a girlfriend, no doubt, and she was headed toward becoming the woman he knew. Wave would present her with another chance to continue developing. It would encourage her to put in more effort in her training, not that she wasn't already. After all, she was Hinata. He made the decision to return with some scars because he would rather be the first to receive them than her. Having made up his mind, he squeezed her and lowered his mouth to blow in her ear. He found that her mouth wasn't too far away, so he went there after she giggled and kissed her temple. He didn't mind her blushes at all. He thought reverently, his mouth going back to the place above her cleavage to leave a darker hickey. Naruto was liked by Hinata, in particular, his kisses. She pondered idly whether it would not be the best idea to do this on his bed, but she didn't want to stop, and he was very skilled at it. She thought about how she wasn't exactly a natural at kissing. The first few times went smoothly. She simply continued to move her lips in a rhythmic pattern against his. However, things became a bit more complicated when tongue entered the picture. However, Naruto was quite kind about it, disassembling it and gently informing her that all she needed to do was move hers in circles, and everything would be alright. She was aware that her face was extremely hot at this point, but she forced herself to ignore the lightheadedness because she didn't want to pass out again. This was a very wise choice because she clearly needed to be awake for the hands that seemed to follow the tongue. She had to decide what to do with hers since Naruto didn't assist her with this one. She mirrored him to help with the reach, and he had one leg up on the bed for balance. She liked how he kept moving his thumb over her ribs. It tickled, but in a good way. His hands were on her waist. Hers simply remained in their current location, one in her lap, one on the bed. It seemed a little cheesy, and she kind of hoped he would tell her where to put them because he seemed like such a pro. what with the tickling and the gripping that was just tight enough to make her feel like a girl, but he said nothing mainly due to his busy mouth. That was short-lived. Naruto pulled his tongue out of her mouth, placed his hands back on the bed, and kissed her a few times before stopping when it became clear that she had run out of options. That was really nice, he smiled and asked, "Want to do it again sometime?" Bright red but smiling, she nodded and, to her surprise, took his hand. Then they conversed about their academy classmates, about their teams, regarding her family, concerning the Kyuubi. They had never spoken to one another until yesterday, so she wasn't sure how it was possible, but it was the least awkward thing ever. Perhaps that was simply how speaking with Naruto felt. During her training, Naruto pushed her more than anyone else. He also forced her to exert more effort than she had previously believed she was capable of. Because unlike her family, he wasn't indifferent or disappointed when she didn't get something, like a flip or a block, and he didn't brush it off like her teammates did. Not a problem. Trigun wasn't exactly the situation. He appeared to be upset when she failed to dodge quickly enough or hit without hesitation. The feeling she described was one of frustration. "I know you can do it, so why aren't you?" Which she discovered could be a tremendous motivator. Despite being stressful, why wasn't she doing it, he knew. However, she found Senbon to be fairly easy to use with her eyes. They also proved to be very helpful in slowing down and stiffening Naruto's movements, which were both significant disadvantages when it came to fighting her. He could tell by the expression on his face that it was simple for her as well, so they would soon be trying something new. But from now on, she would carry a few Senbon. They were productive. She had mastered her hands at last. She was fine as long as she continued to move them around his entire torso or held onto his shoulders when he lifted her. Even though Naruto enjoyed keeping his arms around her, she preferred to put them in his hair and avoided being off the ground in these situations. His lap was frequently the best choice. As expected of a stereotypical boy, Naruto was enthralled with the skin that was exposed by her tank top, leaving love bites all over her collar and neck and making her stiffen when they went lower, because they would have issues if he asked her to get shirtless in a forest. Encouraged by his heavy breathing and his muttering of her name, she tried her best to keep up and, with some guesswork, left a fairly dark hickey just below his ear. It was probably not a very convenient location, but neither was her entire neck. If she had to put up with Kiba's eyebrows wiggling once more, she hoped he would receive some teasing from his teammates about it. They calmed down after exchanging more kisses. The mutterings of 1, 2, 3, 4, I declare thumb war, were interspersed with deep breathing, conversation about the day, teasing, and a lot of cuddling and hair sniffing, the latter primarily from Naruto. But she liked the smell of his shirt. However, Naruto would occasionally become silent, the same sort of silence as in the clearing that day, the silence of, "I'm hiding something." She made an effort to ignore it, controlling his opposable digit while he was preoccupied. Soon enough, he was back to her, kissing her again and ogling the scant cleavage that the shirt revealed. She was unable to decide whether she should wear something high collar to deter further sucking on her neck or endure a few hours of discomfort and try this again later with a proper bra to see his reaction. Naruto's expression indicated that the former was winning out. Naruto felt agitated. "No, I'm not angry." In fact, there were no words to express how fucking angry he was. Since he was from the future, he had anticipated that his ability to predict events would have been far superior to this. He had greatly underestimated the impact he had on Hinata's courage and the intimacy that makeout sessions provided when they were 16. Everything was fine. They were seasoned ninjas, and life was all about intensity. You relished every bite of your ramen and every blow you delivered to your opponent because you didn't have a long life and you didn't live half-assed. Shikamaru was completely devoted to his cloud-watching hobby. However, they were now 12. Naruto found it challenging to frown due to the rapidly growing size of his canines, but he succeeded. How the fuck did he miss this? Forget about all the shit Team 7 faced at 12. Hinata was a tracker, not a combat specialist, and she wasn't supposed to be facing an S-class missing nin when she had just reached adolescence. Naruto. Hold on a second. Turning around, Team 7 and one inebriated geezer saw Hinata Hyuga jog toward them before turning to face him. She said, "I wanted to wish you luck on your first C rank." She put a small scroll in his hands and kissed his cheek lightly. "There's a few lunchboxes in there," she said, turning to the other four. "Enough for everyone." Now that it was known that he wasn't the tactless dead last he'd pretended to be in the academy, everyone except Tsunade would see through the gesture. Since no one would comment, he gave her a quick peck on the lips and rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. He failed to produce the blush and any other pheromones that were expected to accompany his embarrassment. "Thanks, Hinata. Save the drama for later. I have to get home," Tsunade snorted. "Blech." Naruto questioned, "What's the matter, old man? Someone after you?" "Shay, after me. You've got some crazy ideas, brat." Tsunade sneered as she turned to leave the gates. Sakura and Sasuke started to follow him, with Kakashi remaining behind. Naruto, Hinata turned on her Byakugan, surprising him. That man, he's lying. He abruptly stopped using the bashful tone he had been using and said, I know, fully aware that Kakashi was watching him but unable to take any action at the moment. Don't worry about it, it's probably nothing. She didn't believe it. Her tone was firm as she stated, there are no coincidences. He kissed her again, to her forehead. This time she was growing tall, much to his chagrin. Since he had missed 3 years of their time together, she could have outgrown him at any point, and he might have only caught up just before his return. He hoped that wasn't the case because he didn't want to have to walk beside his girlfriend in heeled sandals if the 3-year trip with Jiraiya didn't happen this time. I know, he attempted once more, but I have to finish this. Kakashi undoubtedly heard that, and if Naruto retained any information that would help protect his team, he was going to kill him. Oh no. Despite her angry expression, she gave him a strong embrace before letting him go. The 3 people in front of Naruto and the copy nin had paused to allow them to catch up, and they did not rush, separating themselves sufficiently that Hinata could not hear them before Naruto felt compelled by his sensei to clarify his remarks. It was just a guess, he told the Junin. Gatu's monopoly on everything important for Wave's survival means he probably won't be too happy with the development of the bridge. He'll likely send someone after Tsuna. With a stern look into his blue eyes, Kakashi nodded and said, makes sense. What doesn't is you holding out on us. Make no mistake, Naruto, if I find that you intend to harm your teammates, I will do what is necessary. Naruto was certain that this had to do with his interaction with the Kyuubi. My team, sensei, is all I've got along with Iruka. The old man and Hinata don't insult me by assuming my contact with my tenant would change that. I didn't mean anything like that, he said, ruffling his hair with a gloved hand as a smile instantly replaced the frown. After shoving his hands into his pockets and snorting, Naruto hurried up to join Team 7 because of Naruto's encouragement of Sasuke to encourage Sakura, who in turn became much more normal toward her crush. They were getting along much better than they had previously. At this time, Naruto would claim that Tenten was the only girl in Konoha within their age range that was worthy of admiration. He reduced the fundamental prerequisites for becoming a ninja to 3: skill, willpower, and an awareness that life can be quite depressing. In addition to her innate talent and drive, Tenten had a healthy tolerance for the sad realities of life, having spent a year watching the Rookie 9 and knowing Neji and Rock Lee for a number of years. Hinata followed closely behind. She was raised in a family that was almost entirely ninja, and she experienced oppression and contempt from everyone because of her poor fighting skills, which, although he didn't like to think of it this way, would help her become more resilient with Naruto's help. Her talent and drive to succeed were both growing. Alternatively, Sakura and Ino. They were talented, even though they were untidy and ungroomed, and they were determined, but that was also incorrect. His primary task with Sakura was to help her focus on bettering herself with Sasuke's assistance. They were making progress gradually. Ino was someone else's problem. She was already more mature than Sakura and would be alright with the grounding influences of Shikamaru and Choji. By himself, Sasuke was a problem now that Naruto considered it. All Team 7 members really needed was some attention. Sakura, who is usually overlooked in favor of the Avenger and the Jinchuriki, needed someone to help her focus and train so that she could reach her full potential. That someone was Tsunade, drama queen that he was. Sasuke couldn't wait to learn everything on his level before going on to the next, so when Orochimaru provided a way to bypass the conventional learning path and begin working with the big stuff immediately, he seized the opportunity. Unfortunately, Jiraiya rejected all of that shortcut nonsense. Naruto had to start at the bottom if he wanted anything. When that drunk tried to take my money, that one move must have taken a half second or so to execute. Let's get back to those academy katas. A 2-pronged toad attack? Is your summoning time going well? It was lengthy, difficult, and frustrating, but it forced him to recite theory while he slept, which helped him develop his own fighting technique and jutsu. Naruto's inventiveness was strong. Sasuke had the capacity to be creative as well. He was generally pretty by the book, only considering going overboard during the bell test or when he determined that becoming a missing nin was the only way to achieve his goal. He never worked with it, he simply worked at what was provided. And that needed to be altered. Ignoring his irritation and pointing to the stunning surroundings, Naruto leapt to put an arm around the Uchiha. What's wrong with this picture? Before his eyes widened and remained fixed on the puddle, Sasuke scowled, appearing distinctly unimpressed with the entire situation. Squelch Kakashi fragments were all over the floor. Naruto started agitating the chakra close to the seal after grabbing his kunai. For this, Kurama would prefer to be awake. Sasuke said, "Oi, Naruto. We want to talk." Sakura gave a nod of agreement. Pleasantly unexpected when the black-haired boy rolled his eyes and pulled up some beach beside him, Sakura grudgingly took his other side. and Naruto smiled as he let his fishing line rest on the ground. What about that chakra from when we were fighting Zabuza? What was that? Should I tell or not? You tell me. Unexpectedly, Sakura yelled, don't do this. To both boys, I get that you're different from who you were in the academy. I'm not even sure if you're the same person at this point, she said with a scowl, but you said it yourself, the day of the bell test, we're a team. Sasuke replied, if you're going to suck me into this teamwork stuff, you'd better contribute, too. What the devil? I hold the nine-tailed demon fox in my stomach. Sakura started angrily, but stopped when she heard Sasuke nod. The Avenger stated, it makes sense, while keeping a close eye on the line. It's why the villagers treated you like they did, isn't it? Then Sakura gasped, Naruto, but now that I've got this, he said, tapping his forehead protector, I'm free to say and do as I please. Which would bring me to my next point, the blonde shrugged, I had to act dumb until I graduated so they couldn't hold me back out of fear. The smile returned. He had taken care to ensure that only these two and Hinata had seen it, as someone who spent a large portion of their life working to keep from showing any signs that I'm disloyal to Konoha, I can say with a fair amount of certainty that you, Sasuke, are showing an alarming number of them. He laughed when he turned to Sakura. The Uchiha gave him a suspicious look and said, and you, Haruno, are entirely too self-conscious. Before Sakura started talking at 100 miles per hour and Sasuke withdrew behind his long bangs to brood, the two exchanged glances. Naruto calmly picked up the fishing line and reeled in a huge clump of seaweed, allowing the smile to remain on his face for a while. Naruto. He leapt, spinning around with 3 kunai ready to be hurled at whoever had ambushed him and confronted him directly. That wasn't acceptable. He stowed the knives and asked, what are you doing here? Without moving to speak to her when Team 7 traveled to Wave, she was expected to be in Konoha, doing whatever it was that Team 8 did. Taking his distant demeanor as an indication that he didn't fully think it was her, she pointed to her chest, blushing slightly, and showed him the love bite that, ostensibly, only the two of them would be aware of. Upon closer inspection, however, he noticed that she appeared more than a little unkempt. Sweat glistened on her skin as she zipped her jacket open, either to cool down or to better display the mark to him. She was breathing heavily, and her hair was a mess. She must have followed him from Konoha to this location. It was confirmed by her story. I couldn't let you walk into a trap, she stated. If what that man was involved in ended up with you getting hurt, and I'd known it could happen, I couldn't forgive myself, she continued. He cursed. She leapt, Hinata, I really appreciate this, but we're ninja. Something like a bogus mission was bound to happen sometime. She appeared remorseful, perhaps understanding the folly of packing up and leaving the village so abruptly, but it didn't appear that she was completely opposed to coming here. He realized, at least now that he was safe, she could rest easy. As he relieved the Hyuga of her pack and started to stroll slowly back to Tsunade's, he thought, this isn't right. Hinata hadn't been this reliant, but he knew she had admired him at this moment. But she had been so self-conscious. He thought perhaps even oppressed to the extent of being harmed on some level back then. The Hyuga were her life, but now that he had pushed himself into it, she was instantly focused on him. How much time had he spent with her? Training, dates, and lengthy lip-locking sessions in the dark were all far more intense than a girl who had been ignored before. He was the only one who had believed she was valuable, so it must be horrifying for her to watch him put himself in danger. He let go of his disapproving distance and took her hand, now noticing how much she resembled a kicked puppy. She looked at him incredulously, and when he kissed her temple, she nearly melted. His words, I missed you, followed up her jaw. Wait while I explain this shit to Kakashi once more. Kakashi struggled to choose whether to reward the strange events that Naruto set off or to put an end to them before the waves became uncontrollably large. The Junin reluctantly acknowledged that Hinata's devotion to her comrade was admirable and that she had his permission to accompany them for the duration of their mission to Wave, but she had better be ready for danger and a chewing out when she got home. This was due to sheer dumb luck and the remnants of Hinata's exhaustion, which were actually from their spontaneous kissing, sweaty hair, flushed cheeks, and a lip that she was worrying about so much that she was splitting the skin to conceal any potential swelling. Thus, during the very risky battle with Zabuza and Haku, Hinata was on the bridge with them. Okay, that he could handle. After all, Sakura was present and may have even lagged behind Hinata in terms of development. Thus, Hinata was taking part in the conflict. Okay, all right, since she was there to ensure that he was safe, he couldn't really expect her to leave once the fighting began. He did not approve of Hinata being in Haku's mirror dome while Sasuke helped Kakashi. Naruto restrained Kurama's excitement and desire for a real fight. Hinata. She was able to keep up with her flexibility and Byakugan. This was probably the easiest kind of training for her. It was similar to observing a dancer. When Haku realized this, he increased the speed, and all of a sudden Hinata was jerking her hand in her own direction, her fingers bloody from a senbon that, although it missed its target, did strike a finger and didn't appear to have struck a random tendon. The ice user was preparing for the same attack that nearly killed Sasuke Uchiha in a different timeline, but the pain was distracting enough to mess up her next 3 dodges. After pushing Hinata aside and gathering chakra in his legs, Naruto allowed the needles to slam into him. What was the point of that? Kurama hissed in exasperation. However, Naruto took advantage of the moment to turn to Hinata and smile broadly. Even though she was currently staring at the bridge's woodwork, she would be able to see it with her Byakugan. It wouldn't help with the hero complex, but he'd deal with that later. I don't think you get that you getting hurt here is just as painful for me as me getting hurt is for you, he said. Especially when this is my mission in the first place, Hinata. He clumsily grabbed a fistful of needles at one point and pulled out, fighting a blackout. At least they were moving forward now, despite the fox's complaints. In order to keep him safe until he could actually lie down and take care of himself, Hot Chakra hurried to the injured flesh and vessels. Fixing anything that needed it. Hotter and more volatile energy leapt up to form a tail that resembled a snake. One, he said firmly in his mind, but a twin formed close to it because there was already too much chakra circulating. The energy caused the mirrors to snap like toothpicks as he jumped from one to the next. The young prodigy flew over to Sasuke after a fist cloaked in energy, but his brand new Sharingan wasn't quite ready for a body slamming into his side of the face. Kurama calmed down a little and withdrew most of what he had just injected into the blonde as Naruto turned back to Hinata. When Naruto pulled his girlfriend up, his skin was still hot, but she was either too numb or didn't mind, or perhaps she was worn out and chakra depleted, he surmised as her eyes flitted down. After placing her away from any ice fragments, he leapt to the spot where Kakashi was charging up a Chidori. His own system would remove the remaining fox's chakra over the course of the remaining week, but it was still sufficient to keep him from feeling as worn out and sore as the other members of Team 7. He was also more than happy to carry Hinata back to his place while she napped. She was sufficiently exhausted from the hormone fest in the Hokage's office to not protest a piggyback ride, given that she would have been exhausted from the fight and the journey to and from Konoha. He kind of expected her to nod off. After all, it had all occurred in a few days, and she most likely hadn't eaten or slept to make up for it. Since she was wearing her jacket, he placed her on his bed and covered her with a light blanket before getting some clothes and his towel and taking a shower. This was a serious issue at the moment, and he wasn't quite sure how to handle it. Positively, Hinata's skills and confidence were developing at a very good pace. She was improving far more quickly and effectively than before, thanks to his assurance that he thought she was a cool, attractive girl and a good ninja. However, she had previously done this on her own or in collaboration with her teachers and teammates. Naruto was now pushing growth that she might not be ready for because he turned the knob too hard, unintentionally making the water colder than he had anticipated. It had taken her 3 or 4 years to figure this out on her own. He hadn't considered things like this, but he had thought that they could expedite that with his help. While he was coming out of the closet, with his relationship with the Nine Tails and whatever mess Gaara and Orochimaru were coming up with, it would be nice to have a lot of trust because there were worse people in Konoha. Even to have hero complexes for. However, she was Hinata much more significant than any individual. Now what exactly was he to do? He was reluctant to show her indifference, since it would not only be a reflection of her family's behavior but also might have even more unanticipated consequences. He had no doubt that he could somehow make Hinata leaving the leaf happen. No matter how unlikely that scenario was, the only thing he could think of was working with her on things like theory or medical jutsu, which he was terrible at. Medical jutsu, which he detested. The worst matchup ever was with him and chakra control. However, his health depended on this. He tried to find the doorknob blindly, with his face covered by a towel, and on his way out, he bumped into a very awake Hinata. When he noticed 2 of her scrolls on the counter and another of her jackets hanging on a hook in the foyer, he smiled and set the kettle for multiple cups of instant ramen to share. She also had a toothbrush in his bathroom. If he was not mistaken, they shared his apartment most of the time. But she wasn't staying here permanently. Was that advantageous? It pleased him instead of having an uncomfortable, "Are you moving in?" conversation later. It was easier to get this started comfortably now. She would be able to live independently of the Hyuga compound by Chunin. He sat down to wait while the noodles rehydrated, covering the ramen to prevent any steam from escaping. He determined to pay more attention to Hinata's changes. She didn't have to be exactly the same as she had been before, but he was fairly certain that a significant departure from who she had been at the time wouldn't work out well. Even though he was pleased to see a fuchsia bra strap, he wasn't going to be upset if it meant she would have to wear such items. Her face flushed as she nervously fingered it after catching his attention. "It's new," he said. "I like it," and pushed a cup of ramen in her direction. Sasuke was aware that, during its development, Konoha had produced 3 extremely talented ninja. Whether or not they were in danger of defecting, Naruto was particularly familiar with one of their habits, and this person wasn't training an apprentice at the time. At a team lunch, Naruto asked Sasuke, "Have you ever thought about sealing as a specialty?" Sakura raised her eyebrows into her hair. The Avenger waited for an explanation while remaining silent. "Jiraiya's not training anyone right now, is he?" She sighed, Hold on, you can't just waltz up to the Toad Sage and ask him for an apprenticeship." "I won't." "Sasuke will, and you'll be going up to Tsunade," shrugged Naruto. Sasuke chewed thoughtfully and remarked, "Even if we could, Jiraiya wouldn't be easy to find, and Tsunade hasn't been in the village for years." Smiled, "With the Chunin exams coming up, he'll be here soon. And I've got a pretty good idea of how to sway him." He laughed when it came. It wasn't the menacing smile that made them know they should stop talking and pay attention, but it was fascinating enough that they both briefly put down their food to hear what he had to say. "You know those books Kakashi's always reading? Icha. Well, on top of being one of the Densetsu no Sanin, our favorite sage is also the author, leading to the conclusion that he's a giant pervert." Sasuke was not far behind Sakura, who appeared prepared to stab him in the eye with her chopsticks. He extended a helping hand. "And I happen to have a jutsu that no pervert can resist, of course. Having worked so hard on it, I'm not about to reveal its secrets to anyone should someone with a certain dojutsu capable of copying techniques catch sight of it, though." Sasuke sneered, "That's the dumbest plan ever." "It's the best one we've got," Naruto responded. "No ninja's keen on revealing their secrets, and you need a teacher who you take seriously, otherwise you won't be in Konoha for very long." "Why are you so certain I'll defect if I get so much as bored on a mission?" the Uchiha asked, rolling his eyes. Naruto firmly stated, "It's all in the way you present yourself, Sasuke," before reaching for additional rice. "What was that for?" Naruto asked, smiling at a beaming Hinata as he drew back for breath. "I put Neji on defense." Time slowed. "That's fantastic, it is also frightening." She favored her left side, which led him to conclude that the genius quickly and enthusiastically returned those few moves. "It was just for a short while, and we weren't practicing with gentle fist, it was just an assessment of our skills with weapons, but I had him retreating for a few moves," he said. "Thank you so much," she said, her mouth on his once more, her right hand cupping her side and her left hand eagerly grabbing his hair. He chuckled and said, "What did I do? It was all you." However, this had most likely not occurred in the prior timeline, so he was partially to blame, which raised the question of what exactly Hinata was concealing because no one had bothered to use it. How much of her skill set was unutilized or unaltered? Surprised once more by her eager acceptance, he used the relatively remote training ground to slip her the tongue because of her brilliant smile. She was actually taking the initiative herself and was becoming much more excited than usual. Her left hand came down from his hair and moved along his neck, then his chest, down to his abdomen, and back up. Now under the fabric of his shirt her tongue was tagging his and darting back into her mouth, forcing him to pursue it with his own. She fingered the waistband of his pants, pulling them apart and pressing his face into the crook of her neck to conceal his expression, causing him to breathe sharply through his nose. It was unusually forceful, amazing, but surprising. It was both a relief and a disappointment. That was really something. "I think you're making me a little too excited, though." He blew in her ear with his mouth, enjoying the shiver that followed. "I mean, really, Hinata, I'm a boy, just what do you think you're doing to me?" He sighed as she ducked her head and withdrew. Her cheeks flushed pink, her pulse was quicker than ever beneath his lips as he awkwardly nosed her chin back up so she faced him. "I was just teasing, I really liked it. Your kisses are the best." "Come on," he said, pulling away with a sigh. "Let's look at those ribs, I think they're really bothering you." As he strolled casually next to Naruto, Kakashi remarked thoughtfully, "Sakura's been talking to me about you," without raising his gaze from his porn. "Yeah? What did she say?" the blonde asked, her eyes twitching. "Oh, this and that," hummed the Junin. Naruto let out a sigh. He was particularly annoyed by Kakashi's propensity to sidestep the topic when he was interested. It was something that eventually became commonplace, an interrogation technique that might unintentionally cause your interviewee to divulge information. In a monotone, he said, "Kakashi-sensei, you don't really trust me, do you? Is it because I'm so different from when I was in the academy, or is it the Kyuubi?" The copy nin's shocked expression soon vanished, but he appeared prepared to deny everything. Kakashi Hatake looked at Naruto solemnly and shrugged. "I don't really have any reason to, but the change between yourself from the academy and the one on Team 7 now is a lot more drastic than expected. You've spoken to the Hokage, right?" Their sandals clattered loudly on the gravel. Even he is surprised. Neither was trying to be silent, and he was enjoying the sounds of scuffling large, Yellow circles were left on the ground by the lamps. A woman carrying 2 enormous shopping bags was walking farther ahead since he was the vile demon and all. He doubted that anyone would accept his assistance at this time, but he would have asked if she needed it. Naruto sighed through his nose once more, louder this time. I'm still the same, I still want to be Hokage. I guess I still like ramen and training. I assumed you were unsure of your objective, the elder shinobi asked. The words, I know I want to stay in Konoha, were emphasized by Naruto. I know I want Team 7 to stay together, and I know I want to stay with Hinata-chan. Kakashi muttered, what makes you think Team 7 won't last? It might, said Naruto, we're getting better with teamwork, and are taking each other seriously now that I'm not playing dumb. And your constant teasing about Sasuke going missing Nin would help steer him back towards staying with the Leaf, Kakashi said. The blonde replied, yup, but Sasuke's ambition is still his obsession, and if it doesn't look like we're getting him there, he'll leave. Kakashi questioned, and this would be why you brought up Jiraiya? Sealing takes longer to learn than everyday assassination techniques, but it's hard to learn, and a challenge for Sasuke would be worthwhile, since it would feel like he was doing something he needs to feel like he isn't wasting his time. Naruto shoved his hands into his pockets. And I doubt a Sannin would take any whiny bullshit from him, even if all it was brooding, he said out of habit. Kakashi murmured, alright, I'll see if I can't convince Jiraiya-sama to give Sasuke a few moments of his time when he's in town. A very pleasant sense of relief spread through Naruto as he smiled. Jiraiya would feel a connection to Minato because Kakashi had been his pupil. Perhaps the sage would think about training the Uchiha if Kakashi brought it up to him. They continued to walk in silence until Kakashi said, so, Hinata-chan, huh? Would she be the cause of all those red marks on your neck? In a much lighter tone of voice. The Genin's face lit up with agitation and said, stay out of it. With an eye smile, the Junin asked, what kind of sensei would I be if I did that? A word of advice, my pupil, invest in a comfortable scarf. He then abruptly turned around, cutting off the conversation, and left for wherever he lived. Before deciding he really didn't want to know and hastily finishing the walk home, Naruto stood there in shock, wondering who could be responsible for the hickeys all over Kakashi's neck. Though they were not as close as they had been in the past, he and Konohamaru were still acquainted, so when the boy ran into a hostile group of Suna nin, even without an enraged Sakura pursuing them, he assumed it was fate. He jumped in to assist. The only annoying thing was that he was dating Hinata at the time, so he would likely need to discuss being a Jinchuriki with her more. He simply didn't have much to say without mentioning his contact with the Kyuubi, and it seemed a little premature to start calling Kurama a friend and such. It wasn't that he was uncomfortable with the subject. Naruto yelled, oi, Sand Nin. Drop him, he's just a kid. A Leaf Genin, huh? Kankuro said in a smug tone. How about we enjoy ourselves before the boss arrives? Naruto said, set the child down and save it for the test. The voice behind him said, what's going on? What are Sand Nin doing in Konoha? And isn't that the Hokage's grandson? Tamari shot her brother a stern look at this point, and the puppeteer appeared prepared to release the boy without further protest. However, Sasuke's stone, which he was using to enjoy the super cool atmosphere of a high branch, caused Konohamaru to fall painfully to the ground. Hinata took advantage of this opportunity to give the child a quick look and a hair ruffle as a pick-me-up for anyone observing. This is a very adorable moment. Kankuro, stop it or I'll kill you. The redhead dangling upside down from a tree branch caught everyone's attention. Gaara appeared as uninterested as ever. His gourd still clung to his back, heavy as ever, and his eyes, darkened by lack of sleep, still resembled the rings around a raccoon's. There was nothing the Avenger enjoyed more than challenging himself, so Sasuke's eyes narrowed and a smirk formed on his lips as he prepared for a fight with the other boy. But Naruto greeted them with a smile. Good, now we can all be friends. You're here for the exams, right? Sasuke gazed at him, perplexed by his voice. His poor acting abilities were putting on a show. The grin on his face was entirely artificial. Even Hinata appeared to be beginning to feel uneasy about it. The dark-haired Genin was asked by the one-tail container, my name is Gaara of the Sand, yours? The boy said, Sasuke Uchiha, with a nearly distracted response. Naruto used the occasion to wish the opposing team luck. Maybe we'll see each other in the exams. Was enough to send them on their way, and when they were gone, he received 3 odd looks from the people around him. With a frown, Sasuke asked, what was that about? The Avenger's expression was reflected in the blonde's. That guy. With the chakra vessels around her eyes protruding, Hinata remarked, his chakra is really strange. A large amount of it is concentrated in that gourd, though they were now out of his line of sight. Sasuke gave her a contemplative look and followed her gaze toward the 3 siblings as a reward for the ninja's assessment of a possible threat. Naruto planted a kiss on her cheek. Sakura inquired, what was up with his eyes? Frowning, Naruto remarked, it's like my whiskers, but I think he actually doesn't get any sleep. So they're from the fox? She asked, scowling at Naruto as she eyed his face curiously. He couldn't even recall getting the scars, so they weren't a big deal. However, he could feel them changing during fights, like ghostly pain from old wounds, and he knew that his skin had split evenly in 6 places on his face at some point. You think I carved up my own face for fun one day or something? He asked the next time. He'd have to talk to the 9 tails about it. She appeared somewhat sheepish, but not very contrite. Sasuke went on, he's a Jinchuriki, and his marks are like a raccoon. Which one is that? When asked, the one tail, Naruto replied, has an affinity for sand, and they're from Suna. It fits. As soon as the sand nin left, Konohamaru and his friends fled, and the 4 of them changed. What now? He furrowed his brow and said, Hinata and I are going to return to our date. We'll just have to watch our back around him. The other members of Team 7 exchanged glances. His voice, that wasn't the tone of someone who's sane. Squeezing Hinata's hand, Naruto guided her away. After they were a distance away, Hinata asked him, her white eyes staring intently into Sakura's, did what Sakura said bother you? Did it seem that way? Not really, since it was a little later in the day and the streets were largely deserted. He used the chance to place a hand on her waist and move her torso closer to his without further encouragement. She wrapped her arm around his side and did the same. Her expression was the same as when she fought, and he knew that if he argued, which he wouldn't, but hypothetically, she would shoot down everything he said. I want you to know, she said resolutely, that I really don't care about the Kyuubi or Naruto, and that's what matters. Though it might have been too early or not the right moment, he knew what he wanted to say, I love you. They may have to wait a little longer before he finally coughed up the words because he liked to make dramatic statements in dramatic settings, such as during a battle. Instead, he pulled her to a side street and tried to eat her face while maintaining a blank expression. He couldn't help but be corny and plant kisses all over her, but he controlled himself later and kept it strictly semi-perverted. You're amazing, Hinata, you know that? He said as he ran his tongue down her neck. He noticed that bra strap once more. I don't think there's anyone quite like you. He was becoming quite interested in what the whole thing looked like. Her hands moved to run through his hair as she gave him a kiss in return, blushing brilliantly. You're more than amazing, she quietly replied. I don't think I could have gotten so far in my training without you, without your acknowledgement. Now they were talking like this. Damn it, he wanted to make out with her. It's all you, he said. He smiled at her and stepped back, keeping his hands on her waist, saying, I think you just needed a push. He maintained eye contact despite the awkward silence, watching as her blush darkened and spread down her neck and across her face. Unconsciously, a shy smile came to her face. He obediently said, Naruto, kiss me again. The audacity of the command prompted a far hotter kiss than usual. With a bed and couch as their other options, neither of them was particularly interested in making out outside, so they hurried back to his apartment. After entering, he caught her by the hips and dragged her to him from behind, receiving a startled, oh. Before giving his neck and hair a few apprehensive strokes, he swiftly shifted and gave her another kiss, this time very gently, while keeping his hands on the small of her back and his tongue in his mouth, realizing that the pelvic contact was most likely the source of her tension. When Hinata pulled him over to the couch, she must have realized that her hesitation had brought back the gentlemanly kisses and decided she wanted something else. Before long, he had a girl on his lap. His hand slid down to her hip once more, enjoying the sensation of skin between denim and cotton. Using the date as an excuse, they had thrown their normal clothes in the washing machine and changed into less cozy and more flimsy civilian clothes. Benefits included a jacket that was much less heavy and easier to take off of Hinata, as well as the bra that was pushing her well-developing breasts higher up into his view despite the somewhat constricting jeans. As she lowered the zipper of his own sweatshirt and rubbed circles into the base of her spine beneath her jacket, causing her to arch up into him, he reassured her in her ear. Hinata quickly shifted her limbs so that she was straddling him, her mouth touching his, then stiffened, as if she were a little uncomfortable. He took a moment to realize that this was because she had just received a rather embarrassing reminder that he was a man as he tried to control what seemed to be the biggest laugh of his life. A flushed Hinata tried to continue the kiss. She eventually excused herself to use the restroom, and during the 10 minutes she spent there, he laughed into his fist. It was interesting that this was their first experience with an erection, but he guessed the intensity of their lip-locking had been increased pretty quickly in a very short period of time. He realized that he had never had one near her. He had been cautious about it before, but now that they were alone in his house and she had been straddling him, he laughed into his hand once more. Her expression was so funny. When he began laughing at her anxious expression, she finally emerged from the restroom, Appearing somewhat more composed but swaying slightly on her feet, he approached her, kissed her cheek, and said, "How about some tea?" in an attempt to defuse the situation. "Okay," she said almost in a whisper. He felt her arms envelop him just as he was ready to go fetch the kettle. "Thank you." After turning around and giving the hug back, he raised an eyebrow and said, "I'm actually sorry, that may have been a little embarrassing. I'll try and keep it under control." She muttered, "Thank you for everything," over his shirt. He said, "Stop thanking me," a little irritated. "Geez, Hinata, I wouldn't like you if you weren't awesome already. You're cool, strong, and you're really pretty." He tightened his grip on her. "Give yourself some more credit. Okay. You're my girlfriend, after all." "Okay," she said again, in the same odd tone of voice that she had used when he suggested tea. They hugged for a long time as they stood there. It was pleasant. The night before the Chunin exam, Hinata was having a massage and sipping a cup of frothy cocoa in order to ensure that they were ready for the tests. Naruto had invited her over for another sleepover this time. They would discuss recent spars, double and triple check their supplies, and unwind. She put down the gutsy ninja and tipped her head back to inform him that he had once again found a sensitive spot on her back after his fingers found a sore spot. He had been silent so she could read and savor the hot chocolate. She wasn't totally sure what he was thinking about, but it wasn't a big deal right now because it felt good. The silence was broken by his laugh, and his hands, which had been kneading her muscles, suddenly moved halfway down her back and grabbed her shoulders to steady him as he leaned forward to kiss her neck just below her ear. Naruto was somewhat mysterious. Even though she admired him, she had always thought he was silly before they had that conversation in the clearing. He is constantly being loud, pulling practical jokes, and attracting attention to himself, but since his graduation, a completely different side of him had emerged, one that, despite their close relationship, kept her guessing. He was fairly similar to the original Naruto in that he still cared deeply about everyone who mattered to him, and about being a ninja he was also quite kind and, as usual, loved ramen. However, she could understand why some people were uneasy about the differences. He wasn't a bad actor, but he was far more cunning than had been implied. She would have been concerned about the abrupt change if she hadn't been this close to him. Because of his actions, this Naruto was also distinct from the previous one. He gave her wonderful massages the night before a difficult test, baked instant cinnamon rolls for her if she told him there would be a skill evaluation at the compound later, and held her hand as they strolled down the street. Despite her love for Naruto's audacious declarations in the past, she couldn't get enough of this and couldn't see the loudmouthed character doing any of these things. It was just so easy to be with him, conversing, hugging, and fighting. He was the kind of guy she wouldn't have expected to spoil his girlfriend, although she wasn't entirely sure how she was going to repay him. The new bra and her culinary prowess appeared to be sufficient for the time being. In order to avoid spilling the hot chocolate on his surprisingly clean floor, she carefully moved herself into his lap and prepared to kiss him. She leaned back into him, pulling him down, and kissed his neck at an awkward angle. Her hands moved along his chest, giving him goosebumps, and her mouth moved along his jaw, finding his pulse just below and kissing it before moving down to his collar. She sensed that he was observing her, perhaps simply engrossed in the moment, perhaps engaging in that behavior that makes him pensive and aloof. Although it was a little annoying that she was on top of him while he was dozing off, it usually just took a kiss to get him to return. Mouth-to-mouth contact worked, and soon his hands were on her, one running down her thigh while the other continued to support her back with the couch's assistance. The taste of her drink contrasted deliciously with the salty taste of his mouth from the popcorn they had eaten. It was amazing. Naruto. And she wanted more. He had always supported her taking the initiative, so she took hold of his shirt and drew him to her, gently grabbing his hair. He stopped. She thought she had gone too far when his eyes swept over her, but then he was kissing her more intensely, pressing her against the couch, his hands moving on her hip and waist, one leg thrown over hers, and it was amazing as he reapplied the love bites on her neck that had been on the verge of healing. She held onto his shoulders and panted into his ear, oblivious to the embarrassingly loud sound of their lips parting. She moved her legs out from under him and placed them on either side of him, pushing him back into his previous position while bending in an interesting way to keep their lips together. She felt the room sway and her face heated at the clear certainty that he was enjoying this, but she kept her focus on his face, noticing how his eyes were fixed on hers and how laughing seemed to be the last thing on his mind. What was so funny about it, anyway? She was able to ignore the vertigo and give him a few genuine kisses before he gently separated them, perched his forehead where her neck met his shoulders, and exhaled deeply. He exhaled. That was, wow, and she hummed in agreement, since it was quite, wow. She was, wow, at almost everything they did, but this. In order to make sure they got there 8 hours before the test tomorrow, they brushed their teeth, crawled into Naruto's slightly crowded bed, and eventually threw the cooled cocoa down the drain after cuddling and kissing for a while. They didn't make out again that night. Hinata stayed up a bit later than Naruto due to anxiety, but she fell asleep quickly after because the sound of his breathing was a wonderful white noise. Being exhausted for the Chunin examination would not be acceptable. Though he didn't question or criticize it, Naruto was quite taken aback by Hinata's choice to forego her heavy jacket in favor of a new, darker, and more form-fitting one for the test. Since she was primarily a taijutsu fighter and had never used her old jacket much, the loss of space for storing weapons wouldn't be felt. Besides, this new jacket was better for camouflage and weaving between obstacles because it had less fabric to catch on pokey objects. He tried to focus mostly on her face, but it also gave him the unique pleasure of admiring the curve of her waist. Together, Team 7 and Team 8 went into the examination building. Sakura complimented Hinata on her new outfit choice, and he and Kiba engaged in some verbal sparring about the exam, bringing Sasuke and Shino into it to foster team unity. The atmosphere was actually becoming rather cozy until Team 9 arrived. When Hinata and Neji looked at each other, tension began to rise in waves throughout the group. Naruto was taken aback by the results of his efforts because this was the first time he had ever seen Hinata with her family. During this time the two faces were almost identical. Despite the minor variations, Neji's nose was straighter, Hinata's face was rounder, and her lashes were longer. Hinata had learned to control the Hyuga's emotionless face on her own, and she responded to her cousin's tightly controlled rage by coolly staring him down. "Greetings, Hinata-sama. Neji ni-san, it is good to see you. You as well." A hush fell. Despite this tension, Lee remained silent. Kiba moved uncomfortably. Naruto said in a lighthearted manner, "You guys are a year ahead of us, right? Neji Hyuga, last year's Rookie of the Year?" However, his team's close examination of him threw out any chance that he would come across as amiable. "Yes." Neji answered back with a smile that was bright enough to blind. He said, "Wow. Then you guys got a whole year on us in experience. We'll just have to try harder, without making any attempt to alter the expressions of those around him, though Kiba was staring at him as if he should really know better than to be a loudmouth in such a tense situation. His team was giving him away. He really needed to talk to them about that, and Hinata wasn't appearing any less stiff, so perhaps it wasn't a good idea to act the fool in an attempt to make her face move like other faces. He ran his thumb along her wrist, but all he managed to do was make Neji's eyes narrow like a hawk on a rabbit as they held hands. "And you are?" he asked in a tone that didn't reveal anything, but Naruto was aware of these genius types and that Neji had been observing him and the responses of those around him since the start of the conversation. The cautious and watchful responses from Sakura and Sasuke immediately made him someone to watch, and the fact that Naruto could see the wheels turning in his mind now that it was clear where Hinata had been all this time and who it was that she had been hanging out with that had turned her into a capable kunoichi was him further confirmed that, dead last, the Rookie of the Year for the following generation, Sasuke Uchiha, was watching closely to see what Naruto would do next. He was a wild card. "Naruto Uzumaki, you've probably heard of me," he grinned. Neji pointed to another group of genin approaching them and said, "No, I can't say I have. We should get going. It was good to meet you. You, too, good luck in the exam." When Naruto saw their backs, he stopped pretending to smile. He did not include himself in the conversation between the two rookie teams. Hinata had turned into a sincere Hyuga. If you can't beat him, join him, and such might have been a good thing. Why was the only question. Despite being very different from the girl she had been 2 months prior, the Hinata he knew, both in private and among peers, was always friendly and a little bashful because of his PDA. However, the Hyuga genes appeared to take over after she had interacted with Neji and probably all of her relatives. It was necessary for Naruto to steel himself once more and remind himself that this was not always a bad thing, not the same as before, very different still. It was Hinata. He also cherished Hinata enough so that if she reacts to an awkward situation by maintaining a cool demeanor and tone, then fine. Though he put on a smile and said things to make himself seem simple-minded, his was pretty much the same in retrospect. He may have even served as an example of how to put on a mask. Well, whatever, Hinata was just that. Hinata. He put his arms around her from behind and leaned his head against hers as he looked around the room, mentally nodding when he heard her stumble over a word in her conversation with Ino, whose face changed from semi-interested to smug when she'd seen their handholding. Hinata's ears reddened in his peripheral vision. A teenager with silver hair and glasses approached holding a deck of cards with a small, bored sigh. Naruto placed his forehead on Hinata's shoulder and closed his eyes as if he had been studying all night. He was so bored and exhausted that he asked, "Couldn't this teacher come already?" Less effort meant less interaction with Kabuto, who would not only be able to see through his mediocre acting but would also instantly label him as a threat. His willpower had been put to the test in a very annoying way by sitting next to Hinata. He had no idea how difficult it would be to break the habit of staying in touch with her if she were right next to him. Nope. Can't do that here. That kept popping up every few minutes were really annoying, and he didn't necessarily try to hold hands or caress hair. Fortunately, the first test was over, and he was now waiting for his turn for a waiver while holding hands with his girlfriend in front of the forest of death. I hope your first Chunin exam is a sham. Here, Sasuke took the initiative, choosing to locate a source of water, and, ideally, fish, wait there, and then ambush another group that seemed like the most dependable plan available. But to the Avengers' chagrin, Naruto and Sakura's unwillingness to part ways meant that their search speed was slowed down. However, they quickly discovered a water source and fell into the trap set by another team. Although they weren't Orochimaru's team, these grass genin were still powerful enough to be wary of. Fortunately, there was a Team 7 that was a formidable force that operated as a cohesive unit without geographical divisions. They had a scroll almost instantly, so their next objective was to reach the tower. It wouldn't be as tough as they had anticipated if the exam thus far was any indication. If only. Although Orochimaru was never one of Naruto's favorite foes, he had anticipated that his time travel would provide him with some advantage. At least the advantage of surprise here. Kurama was completely behind him, and Naruto gained power swiftly with little encouragement from him. Unfortunately, it was impossible to overcharge a 5-point seal to the stomach. More painful than any wound he received in the battle was the abrupt loss of Kurama's voice and chakra. It was like putting wool over his ears. He was left with both his own chakra and the good, but not massive, as he was accustomed to, chakra the Kyuubi had previously directed into him. His clones had to gasp. Avoid the Snake Sanin's attack in order to take care of themselves. The Snake Sanin was shocked, undoubtedly, and extremely unhappy with the discrepancy between his perception of Sasuke's team's skill set and their actual skill set, but it was more than enough to keep him ahead. But who knew there was so much talent in Konoha? Naruto remarked to himself afterward, attempting to mimic Orochimaru's way of thinking. In the end, he became predictable and pliable, and his bloodline would be Orochimaru's to take. He was a herding, power-hungry teenager with genuine talent and ambition that overcame his desire to become a ninja already. That was a treat. Even though he wasn't a dead last, he was able to persuade the entire village that he was, and they allowed him to graduate despite their suspicion that he would never succeed as a ninja. Fascinating. It was intriguing enough to potentially expend a lot of chakra to mark him with a seal that muttered astute little recommendations into his ear, and it hurt like hell. In his time, Naruto had studied the Cursed Seal of Heaven and found that it had a unique quality. The most recent prototype linked the victim to the person who had made the marking, not enough to allow the Snake Sanin to speak to him or hear his thoughts directly, but enough to give Orochimaru a general notion of Naruto's character, what drove him, what he most desired. What exactly, Naruto thought to himself, was probably going to be printed on all of his thoughts, dreams, and deepest desires. Let's keep saying, Hinata. Naruto's commitment to Konoha was far less than Orochimaru had anticipated. His feelings of protection were brief rather than deep and nuanced, as they might have been if he had loved a whole village. Simple to comprehend, and in the end, the Sanin would conclude that Naruto had a deeper affection for something than Konoha. Naruto was a fairly skilled manipulator, though he wouldn't describe himself as such. Nevertheless, he was unable to come up with a clever way for Orochimaru to manipulate the facts in his favor. After all, Hinata was a Konohagakure shinobi, and any strategy to persuade her to change allegiance would involve a plethora of factors that could not possibly be meticulously managed. The man who had gone off and succeeded in founding his own village and winning the allegiance of hundreds of outcasts could still find a way, even if Naruto was unable to come up with it. He took Hinata into his arms and held her there for a few quiet minutes after she approached him following his ceiling. Thanks to Kakashi, no hair on her head was in any way being touched by Orochimaru. He refused to address her with a single goddamn word. In the village of the leaves, Hinata would remain safe and continue developing as a shinobi, whatever it took. Naruto Uzumaki would not be competing in the third round of this year's Chunin exams due to injury, and a less sincere wish to have free time to continue his observations of Konohagakure and its visitors. As it suited his needs to have as many cursed seal victims on the sidelines as possible. Just try asking Sasuke to sit out if there was one sure way to get him to defect. The Hokage suspected that Naruto's compliance with the request to postpone his promotion until next time was more than just a simple request. It was not yet confirmed that Jiraiya was in the village, but it should be shortly, and Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi was scheduled for an examination. Ignoring Kiba's orders to back off, Shiro's annoyed buzzing, Neji's and Sasuke's contempt, Naruto took his spot beside Hinata on the sidelines and moved closer to her than was acceptable in modern society. He didn't care that the back of her neck was turning red and that she was about to faint in order to keep her from toppling over due to the drastically diminished balance that such a position forced upon her. He kept his arms locked around her middle, his chest curved around her back, and his feet firmly on either side of hers. Naruto didn't really care at the moment. but Kabuto was presumably taking notes on Sasuke and his teammates. The first battle was that of Sasuke, who was paired against Sakura rather than the child from grass whose name Naruto couldn't recall. As they entered the arena, the girl trembled a little, but she made no concessions or offers to forfeit. She exhaled and said, "Sasuke." He didn't answer. She took out a few senbon and braced herself before saying, "I know you think I'm beneath you, and that I haven't improved at all since the academy, but you're wrong. I'm not just the fangirl you guys think I am," she said defiantly, looking directly into Naruto's eyes and appearing to suppress an eye roll at his drape over Hinata. Both of the Jinchuriki's teammates were glaring at him as Sasuke mirrored her. Naruto realized abruptly that he had been granted the leadership role he had initially pursued. Officially, perhaps not if pressed, they might not even acknowledge it. However, he chose to sit out, and a small part of the Uchiha and Haruno questioned whether it was really the right idea to participate when Naruto Uzumaki, who had shown himself to be just as skilled as a Junin in both combat and tactics, was cooling his heels on the bench. After all, he was one of the main reasons they had even made it this far. He was never one to discourage teammates from competing, and even though Orochimaru's invasion was going to completely ruin the Chunin exams, they were also full of that wonderful character-building conflict on their own. "Come on, you two. Sakura, kick his butt. Sasuke, give her a haircut," he said, letting go of his girlfriend and leaning out over the railing with a wild smile of his own. That was all the Uchiha would acknowledge in front of so many people, but it was sufficient for the pinkette. "Sakura," Sasuke said, drawing two kunai from the pouch on his leg, "I'm not going to hold back." They were going to witness the last Uchiha in action, so there was silence after that. They vanished in an attempt to block out the odor of 5 days without a bath and concentrate on the nearly overpowering scent of Hinata's shampoo. Naruto buried his nose in her hair. In order to disperse the chakra and maintain the 5-point seal, Jiraiya twisted his fingers into Naruto's stomach and yelled, "Hold still." Kurama's claws immediately emerged from the seal that had been on his stomach, scorching the sage's fingertips as they spread across his entire body. Naruto's skull echoed with the fox's growls, and he tried desperately to silence it because, oh god, he didn't need Jiraiya's attention right now, and this was way too much chakra for a day at the hot springs. "It is too late." "What the shush, Naruto said, and the pain from the stress on his body appeared to go away. However, the Kyuubi discovered something in Naruto's state of being that it clearly did not like, so it tried to remove the cursed seal of heaven the old-fashioned way with a very unmanly squeak. Naruto fell to the ground, holding onto his neck, where two strong forces were engaged in a literal battle over 4 inches of skin. "It's getting rid of the snake bastard's seal," Naruto exclaimed, his jaw clenched so tightly that it cracked his teeth. "The fox." Jiraiya rubbed his chin and wondered, "How? The fox's chakra runs through your body constantly?" As the pain subsided, Naruto exclaimed, "I was using it during the battle. Once you got rid of whatever Orochimaru did, it kept going, and Kurama could feel his chakra." Jiraiya leaned back and examined his red fingers before saying, "Huh? Alright, then let's see that cursed seal." Jiraiya claims that the only remnants of the snake Sanin's chakra and a patch of irritated skin were barely perceptible due to the strong Biju energy he and that area on his neck in particular emanated. The mark had been entirely removed from the fox thanks to the effective work of his chakra. With a playful smile, the Toad Sage addressed the sour-faced Uchiha, who had been waiting for the scene to unfold, saying, "If only Pretty Boy had something like this, eh?" With a gentle neck rub, Naruto said, "Don't even joke," adding, "I don't think that angst could be tolerated." Sasuke swallowed a growl and looked expectantly at the Sannin, who had yet to answer the question the two had asked earlier. "Alright, you want to learn something from me?" Jiraiya thought about it. "Something cool? Oh, I know, water walking," Sasuke said, his annoyance evident. "I know it. I'm asking for an apprenticeship in sealing." "Do you know what you're saying, boy? That's a lifetime commitment, not something an Avenger can pursue," the white-haired man said with a drawl after bursting into laughter. An intense spark of annoyance was contained by Naruto. Jiraiya was apparently far more adept at deflecting prospective apprentices than he had anticipated. Perhaps it was because the sage had been watching him since birth that he had never imagined he would be. It was about the most versatile of all the arts, and the man knew exactly what to say to make the idea of sealing unappealing. "Come on, Ero Sennin, who else could Sasuke go to learn sealing?" Cough. The man who had given him an intricate hickey coughed. Naruto let out a large, irritated exhale. Undo. Damn it. No more Uchiha defecting. Look, kid, I'm not gonna waste my time with someone who's just gonna learn enough to kill someone, and then drop it. With some relief, Sasuke said, "I don't just quit, I want to learn sealing." Repeating what Sasuke had said earlier, Jiraiya asked, "You want an apprenticeship with the Toad Sage?" Sasuke nodded while maintaining eye contact with the man's probing stare. Naruto had to make a concerted effort to hide his tension for a few moments. The typical type of Jiraiya was not Sasuke usually. He chose Minato and Nagato, the ones who wanted to change the world himself. Sasuke also disapproved of his own personal objective of retaliation. With his hands clasped together, Naruto felt Jiraiya's gaze on him. "Please. And, when you're not busy, do you think I could sign the Toad contract?" he asked. With a sigh, Jiraiya said, "All right," turning to Sasuke, "we can try it. Meet me in that," pointing to the closest clearing, "training field tomorrow at noon. I'm not late like your sensei, either, so don't be late." Sasuke bowed and said, "Thank you, Jiraiya-sama." "Hear that, brat? Jiraiya-sama, that's how you treat your elders, got it?" Puffing his cheeks out in boredom, Naruto said, "Whatever, Ero Sennin," although the air in them was actually from a deep sigh of relief here. Sasuke was stranded. "So, can I sign the summoning contract now?" He finally got his name on the Toad contract and called forth a few tadpoles, followed by Gamakichi, to whom he gave the fried crackers he had in his pocket for this very occasion, after a period of being reprimanded and acting like the most hyperactive child on the planet, and feeling a little afraid that Jiraiya would notice something strange and call him on it. He pretended to leave to take care of some business, said, "Business? Was probably research," and the two male genin from Team 7 started to walk home after Jiraiya had gotten a promise from them both that, "You, too, blonde brat, you've got a lot to learn about Toad summons, still." Naruto. Thank you. What are you talking about?" asked Naruto, raising an eyebrow. "You heard me. I know that you did most of the convincing back there. I didn't really want to learn sealing in the first place." "Hey, an apprenticeship doesn't mean just learning about the one thing the teacher's a master of," Naruto replied. "He'll teach you other stuff, too." Neither of them mentioned which one it would have been. "I know," Sasuke said, "and now I'm going to be learning under one of the Sannin, so thank you, and I know you think that if it wasn't Jiraiya, I would have picked another one. But I'm more loyal to Konoha than everyone seems to think, I promise." Naruto gave a sincere smile. "Glad to hear it. Wouldn't want anyone else at my back." After Sasuke left for the Uchiha district, Naruto became aware of what had transpired. Sasuke vowed to remain Sasuke, remained Sasuke, stayed because of him. He opened the door to his apartment and called out, "Hinata," without bothering to kick off his boots. She turned her attention away from her guest, Neji, and exclaimed, "Ah, Naruto-kun. Ah, a guest. What a surprise," Naruto exclaimed, his face shifting from the ecstasy he had experienced upon realizing to his somewhat eerie fake happiness. "Can I help you with anything?" "Hinata will no longer be living with you," sheepishly rubbing the back of his neck, Naruto said. "Well, I wouldn't call it living together," while acting ashamed. "If that's as well as you can act, it's pathetic. I could see through that without the Byakugan," Neji said sternly. "As Hinata-sama has advanced to the next level of the Chunin exams, it is imperative that she receive additional training, especially since she will doubtlessly bring shame to the main branch at her current skill level." Ino versus Hinata, there isn't much conflict there. Neji versus Hinata would be far more intriguing. With a slightly more normal expression replacing the fake smile, Naruto remarked, "Well, can't she get extra training without us having to move half her things to an entirely different part of Konoha?" Neji appeared somewhat arrogant at having figured out the trick. Her living here was only tolerated as it was obvious she would not be heading the Hyuga clan. Hinata's expression grew icier with every word, until her glare finally made its way through. She had been uncertain at his entrance. Her slouch had vanished entirely, but she had been shifting and leaning back, but now she was standing up straight, lowering her arms and allowing them to hang at her sides, and appearing to get stronger with the extra support his eyes were giving her. Now that some sign of her perhaps being fit to advance has appeared, the Hyuga would like to make sure this miracle does not go unheeded. With a much lower voice than he had anticipated, Naruto remarked, "Now, that's funny considering the 2 months that she's spent here have been better for her than any amount of time with you." He wasn't going to stop, though. "Can you imagine why Hinata advanced so much? What could she possibly do in such a cold environment? Hinata can feel that as her strong point." "Emotion has no place in a shinobi," Neji shot back. "Maybe not on the battlefield, or even with a client, but in training, or studying, definitely in interactions with other Konohanin. Emotion has to be there no matter how much shinobi try to be tools. They're people. Nothing will get done if you go about it with no emotion." He stopped. "Hinata? Why yes. What do you want to do?" She looked around in disbelief. "I know I need training in Gentle Fist," and I will accept it, but there's no need for me to start spending all my time at the compound. I can make the journey there and back here with no trouble. Your father will not be pleased. Neji appeared to be smelling something unpleasant. Hinata's white eyes met Neji's directly as she said firmly, I'll deal with that. After a few seconds of processing that, Neji stood there, bowed stiffly to them both, and left. Hinata sighed deeply as the door shut behind him and she took her boyfriend's embrace. He said, You okay? To her, I think so, she said, wrapping her arms around his waist. Good, because that was freaking hot, he said, grinning, and kissed her to silence her laughter. I wonder if you'll look that cute when you get mad at me. She yelled, Don't make me mad, and exclaimed the same joyful laughter that Naruto had been having only moments before. Overall, the evening was pleasant. Naruto argued, but it's fun, and consider the makeup kisses. With a laugh, Hinata scooted past him, avoiding his clutching hands, and ran to the kitchenette. I found pudding on sale. I thought it would be nice for after dinner. It's not gonna be ramen, is it? Pouted Naruto. The woman shook her head and said, You can't eat ramen every day. He insisted, but what's for dinner? I can try. Eggplant soup. Kakashi's favorite. After taking off his jacket and washing his hands, he sat down at the table with Hinata and complied with her implicit request to chop and peel the vegetables while she prepared the oven. She said, Did you have something to tell me? He said with a grin, Something good happened. I just wanted to celebrate. Are you going to tell me what it is? She asked with a smile. Not even a query. Nope. Hinata made no objections. He could tell that she was irritated or concerned by his silences, but she had been remarkably okay with him keeping some details to himself. He said, No, with such enthusiasm that she sighed and acted very irritated until he drew her away from spraying cooking spray and kissed her deeply with oily fingers on the other arm. She put one around his neck and pulled him in. He teased, It's a secret, and blew in her ear. They put all the vegetables, including the garlic, on the pan and waited for the preheating to stop. She sighed, then picked up another knife and finished the tomatoes while he got the onions. Naruto hurriedly cleaned the utensils and put them away to dry, intending to research a few moves that might be used to counter or enhance the Juken in Hinata's battle with Neji. Hinata, whose fingers were now free of the cooking oil that was obstructing them, grabbed his face before he could and drew him in. She was becoming much more adept at initiating the kisses. Despite his desire to lower his hands, he held her by the waist and placed her on the counter, keeping them firmly on her hips and waist. Goddamn it. There was a counter in the way. Her knees were putting pressure on his sides, and she was getting really good at wrapping her legs around him to draw him in. It would have been better if his table had been lower. Though she was still doing everything annoyingly correctly, such as gently tugging his hair, drawing him in by his shirt, and making this adorable sighing sound, Hinata didn't seem to understand his predicament. He could have simply grabbed her and held her upright instead of placing her on the counter. He bet she would have done the same with her legs, and he would have been simultaneously groping her butt. I'm a bit uncomfortable, he said, pulling away and looking down at the edge of the counter. Sorry. After saying, It's my bad, he retreated to allow her to slide away and resumed the lip lock. Although he wouldn't mind when he eventually reached his growth spurt, the fact that she was the same height as him, thankfully not taller, made kissing much easier. He sensed that Hinata was now suffering the counter edge, so he quickly switched places with her. He didn't mind being pressed close now, and he could feel every line of her against him. His hands spread across her back, feeling the cushion of her developing hips and the S-curve of her spine. He simply inhaled the scent of what was probably just a strong shampoo but could have also been perfume, given her developing friendship with the other girls. The oven made a beeping sound. They parted ways, taking deep breaths, and Hinata hurriedly pushed the tray into the device and closed the door before becoming motionless as he embraced her from behind and held her hand as he kissed her neck. He tangled his hands in her hair and held her to him as she turned around and did the same, running her hands down his front and drawing circles on his neck with her tongue. She then locked her arms around his waist and moved her mouth with his when they avoided burning the vegetables. It was a victory for him personally. Jiraiya was more invested in Sasuke's progress than he was in his summoning. In the interim, Kakashi focused on Sakura's progress in medical jutsu and Naruto's training regimen after handing over the Avengers training to the Sannin. In addition to performing D ranks together on a regular basis, Naruto and Sakura assisted Sasuke by sparring, trying to heal him. Though this was all Sakura, and simply hanging out together, Naruto felt a warm, fuzzy feeling in his stomach because it was unexpected. Naruto not only cared about the Toads and Sasuke's progress in the Chunin exams, but he also assisted Hinata. The annoyance and pain of her blows were giving way to, damn, I really should have dodged that, and, woman, I need that arm. Although she still lacked talent in Juken, her accuracy with her Senbon was much more terrifying, eliminating his clones from the training field before they could organize an attack. Of course, the issue was that the kid in the orange jumpsuit would be far luckier than anyone with Hinata's ocular advantage in that regard. Endurance training was required now that she was developing a backbone and wasn't scared to glare Neji down rather than recoil. Naruto was fully aware of how much Neji hated the main branch of the Hyuga family, and Hinata in particular he would execute fate in a brutal manner. After all the immediate issues, there was Gaara Orochimaru, too. Every day, Jiraiya was watching Sasuke and Naruto closely, examining the fox's seal and the area on his neck where Orochimaru had bitten him nearly every time they met. The suppression seal was impregnable against the cursed seal's advances, and the Uchiha's will was strong enough to overcome the snake. The fact that Naruto had never seen Gaara while strolling through the city raised the question of where a sociopath spent his leisure time. In order to get close enough to pull Gaara away from the edge, he needed to deal with his insanity, but he wasn't sure how to do it. Perhaps he could offer a fight, but the likelihood that he would lose his mind and murder his friend was too remote to be worth attempting. Even though he and Kurama had an understanding, his hormonal, 12-year-old body would still succumb to the emotions triggered by the chakra and either black out or worse. Of course, he could try to make friends, but that was a little challenging given Gaara's current outlook. In any case, that would only be effective if he could locate the boy. As the month passed and no one moved, Naruto's fear that Kabuto would notice Hinata decreased gradually. Though he made an effort to avoid giving the impression that he expected someone to follow them, Hinata's Byakugan was particularly helpful in looking for followers, and the scan consistently turned up no spy activity. He was gradually reducing his role as her bodyguard. In fact, it was a minor source of tension for both of them when he escorted her to the Hyuga compound. She refused to leave him due to the Hyuga's disapproving glances, and he didn't mind, but the harsh moments when all the pale eyes in the neighborhood turned to them, or didn't, he couldn't be certain with Hyuga, were not helping Hinata improve her reputation. In the end, Naruto wanted her to take charge of the clan, and no leader benefited from a poor reputation. Even though Hinata's steely gaze indicated that she wasn't going to collapse in on herself as she had in the past, it wasn't exactly a crowd pleaser either. There was a lot of hurrying around during the week before the final exam round. In other words, Sasuke's sealing skills had improved as much as was reasonable for the Avenger. Sealing was a discipline, whether it was complicated or not, and the Uchiha ate those up and spat them out without even blinking. Sakura's medic nin skills had grown to include the ability to treat minor wounds and bruises, which Sasuke in particular was grateful for. Sasuke had his own personal medic for minor injuries and was able to go harder for longer, which helped when your slow offensive meant you had to jump around and take a lot of hits before you could dish out damage yourself. This was in spite of Naruto and Hinata's constant training, but they both agreed that she should support the Team 7 participant first. Hinata's development was absolutely astounding. She squeezed in as much rest and nutrition as she could with some intense training after a month free of D ranks, thanks to special treatment for exam takers. He tried even harder to predict her moods and prepare accordingly, cinnamon rolls, cuddle sessions, and a time of the month kit packed with Sakura's approving assistance. But he also made sure to give her extra attention when they were together. This was done to prevent both Sakura and Ino from going crazy from all the infatuation. Sasuke joked that it was giving his neck time to recover. Naruto nodded seriously and agreed that was a legitimate reason. It was the day after that Naruto sent out teams of clones to prowl the city in preparation for the invasion, packed almost everything he owned in the house into a scroll, and kissed Hinata numerous times before they departed. He would require them. Since Hinata's fight with Neji was the first, not many people watched. Naturally, most of the other competitors were present, including the Konoha 12, but few civilians arrived early enough to enjoy the Hyuga versus Hyuga match. It should come as no surprise that they were both from Konoha and belonged to the same clan, so it might be similar to watching a game of ping pong in that each would simply respond with the same move, and the game would continue until someone made a mistake. Naruto was hoping it wouldn't be. As a result of her hard work, Hinata was more than just a better Juken player. Her skill in the art had certainly improved as a result of her family's training, but the true magic was in almost everything else. In contrast to her previous spars against her family, Hinata was faster, hit harder, stayed in the game longer, and was far more shrewd. She had a strong defense in addition to a conventional Hyuga offense because she knew Juken. Although she could effectively block another Hyuga's blows, her attacks would primarily be modified versions of other styles. Naruto would have placed a wager on Hinata winning the match if they had been of the same age. Unfortunately, Neji's experience would favor him in the battle as it was. Following the Hokage's greeting and the proctor's announcements, the two genin entered the arena to sporadic cheers. Although the blonde was a little anxious, Naruto persuaded Sakura and Ino to join in with a loud whoop story about meeting Neji in the Forest of Death. Hinata took the initiative and tried a Fusenbon, which Neji either avoided or deflected with remarkable ease. He didn't say anything, but his expression made it clear what he thought of her using weapons rather than the gentle fist. Though he gave it less notice than a fly landing on him, he did get nicked a couple of times in his advance on her, and her throws weren't anything to laugh at. As he got within arm's reach, she stopped the barrage of weapons and started using kunai to block his blows. She took advantage of his hesitation to cut his hands and repeatedly tagged him in a few unimportant places that his defense didn't fully cover, like his arms and legs. Neji, frustrated that he hadn't tagged her vitals himself, took a chance on getting cut on his hand to strike her side quickly, and she undoubtedly felt it. Hinata stumbled backward, nearly slipping past her opponent. Playing it safe, she now kept her distance and grabbed her senbon's stash, ready to try to take him down from a distance. Neji snorted, which surprised her. The prodigy called out, "Did you really think that's all it would take?" as he reached into his clothing folds, took out a vial, and drank the solution. "You knew," Hinata said, mirroring her cousin's expression, not wanting to throw them away in case he used them against her as well. She carefully placed the poison-tipped kunai into her weapons pouch. "I could see traces of the poison on your clothes when you returned to the compound 2 nights ago," Neji continued. "Even staying away didn't keep your plan secret, but what's to be expected from a failure?" Hinata remained silent. "Your advances outside Gentle Fist were unprecedented," Neji conceded, "but in the end, you are what you've always been and always will be. You cannot change your fate, Hinata-sama." Naruto scowled as she adopted a posture he recognized. "But I did," she retorted, "and I'm going to change yours, too." He whispered to himself, "What are you doing, Hinata?" For close quarters, that was Juken's stance, just like she had always done, but with a stronger foundation. Neji was too strong for that. It was almost a given that it would almost kill her. "So we're going to stop this pretending? Why don't you just forfeit right now?" Neji asked, as if he agreed. Neji was incensed when Hinata muttered something that even the ninja's lip reading was unable to decipher, at least not from the Konoha Genin's perspective in the stance. He launched himself forward, his chakra-charged blows powerful and delivered with far less dexterity than anyone had expected from the teenager, but they were effective. Hinata appeared to be on the verge of fainting as she staggered backward a few paces. Once more, she extracted a soldier pill from her pack and crushed it between her teeth. She jumped back into the fight after using the fast-acting upper, and now her increased energy caused her to deflect blows and dish out some of her own back, striking Neji once in the ribs and twice on the left side. But she received 2 blows to the chest for her trouble even from a friendly spar. Naruto had seen firsthand that one was enough to put you on your back for 2 days. Neji was, in theory, anything but amiable. Ironically, Neji wasn't as accustomed to absorbing chakra damage as she was, and they both spent a few seconds merely observing each other's wounds. Although Naruto disliked the idea of his girlfriend being durable, Hinata was at least more resilient than some of the other kunoichi he knew. After being battered into the ground for a lifetime, after giving it some thought, she took another soldier pill. With a look of surprise on her face, Neji said, "You'll do serious harm to your chakra coils." "If I can't beat you in this, I'm betting I won't need them for much longer," Hinata stated. Naruto's chakra was becoming unmanageable without the Byakugan's help. In addition to the strain her cousin had placed on her organs, the sudden surge of energy that was rushing through her body left her jittery and hindered her ability to concentrate. With this power, she had a better chance of defeating Neji, but only because she wouldn't be fainting for a short while longer. Not poisoned this time, she removed the kunai once more and approached. "I know I can't beat you with just Gentle Fist." Hinata's mouth moved strangely due to the effects of the drugs, making it hard to understand without being up close. "I can't play by the rules anymore, because the rules aren't giving me the results that I need. You predicted it yourself." "So you admit?" Before he could say anything more, Hinata yelled, "But you don't play by the rules yourself, Neji. You're from the branch house, but you've mastered the Kaden. You don't let predictions hold you back." I refuse to play by the rules." Neji twisted his face and taunted, "So why not just win? Why not just use the seal?" Hinata repeated, "I refuse," with a determined expression on her face. "That seal is a stain upon the family," she said, her demeanor every inch a Hyuga, "and it is my goal to have it abolished once I take my place as the next head." "A failure cannot change a law that has been in place for generations," Neji stated, his expression blank with shock. It was easy for anyone to guess Hinata's thoughts on the caged bird seal. She would never let go of this one thing, even though other Hyuga might have criticized her for being too soft or angry at her lust. Isn't that paradoxical? Hinata was adamant that the caged bird seal had to be removed. Regardless of whether Hanabi or she ended up in charge, it would be moving. And now that she had miraculously won her hero's love and triumphed over her peers in skill, when he was the one who told her she could, who was Neji, who had been mistaken about her never progressing from the start, to tell her she couldn't, After all, Naruto had stated the exact opposite. Her form was shaky and brimming with energy as she shook her head and said, "Fate can't stop. Well, I will prove it to you." Neji's accuracy would have easily repelled it if he hadn't also been hit in multiple key places. Hinata didn't hesitate. Hinata was not absent. She was Hyuga perfection, sharply slicing at the stunned prodigy. There was a problem. She was not protected by Neji. When Hinata was the one moment when Naruto needed to be loud, so he roared, chakra stressing his vocal cords while thinking quickly and doing his best to avoid hesitation. And she did, slamming her cousin hard in the neck while panting and watching him pass out from Whoop's chakra damage and poisoning. Neji had no way of knowing whether the poison on Hinata's clothing was a well-known, fast-acting poison made from berries found in Konoha's forests and made to cause a dangerous drowsiness when consumed, probably because it was adapted to enter directly through the bloodstream from a cut, or something rarer, purchased covertly a month ago in the land of waves and kept in good condition in a cool, dry cabinet, waiting for its time to shine. Even though the Byakugan was all-seeing, it didn't mean its users knew everything. Hinata did not play around. Hinata tripped instead of taking a step backward after dropping her arms. However, it was all right because Naruto was there. He had an odd number of scrolls hanging from him, and his armored mesh jumpsuit probably made him less comfortable than usual, but he was there to pick her up so she wouldn't even have to worry about standing. He was there to congratulate her and kiss her eyelids before the cheers even came, and he was there to stare defiantly back at the group of shocked Hyuga onlookers. He looked directly into Hiashi's eyes and maintained a composed expression. The clan leader was not receiving any emotion from him. Not a single ounce. When Hinata received a lengthy apology and the caged bird seal was exterminated, he could understand. Until then, Naruto would continue to be unpredictable, just like he was to all adults. The man's eldest daughter was literally in Naruto's arms here, and both of them knew where she would go if given the option. In addition, she had been dragged up ahead of the clan's beloved prodigy by the interference of the demon container. He laughed into her hair as he carried her after the medics and kissed her warm skin after Hinata whispered a thank you. His mouth never left the salt of her skin as he said, "What are you thanking me for, huh? You're the cool one." With eager lips and a, "Don't you dare." He silenced her even though it appeared she might disagree because, well, he was proud his girl prevailed and he really wanted to bring her back to their home, not just his anymore, and continued to show her how proud he was of her until she passed out, or perhaps even after that. However, they would face their greatest challenge to date in the following round, which pitted Gaara of the Sand against Sasuke Uchiha. He then created 2 more clones, left them to tend to the sweaty, exhausted heiress, a crash was imminent, and returned to the stadium to support his duck-butt-haired teammate and perhaps wish for some solitude after everything was finished. Hinata must have had a dream. However, it was an amazing dream. There were Narutos on either side of her, one sitting on her bed and playing with a kunai, the other holding her to his lap. Shouts came from outside the room. "Naruto-kun, what's going on?" While the person holding her planted kisses on her neck, the one with the kunai gazed at her. Her face began to flush. She could only imagine the appearance of your double kissing your girlfriend. But the Naruto who was staring at her smirked a little at her blush, and she blushed even more, covering her warm face with a cool hand, and, God, she was tired. Her limbs had never felt this heavy. The person behind her sped up his ministrations and gave a little laugh through his nose. She felt an even greater surge of pride in her chest and suspected that his eagerness was related to her recent triumph. Naruto was pleased with her accomplishment. "We're being invaded." That was a huge blow to her cheerful disposition. "Then why?" she asked, her eyes widening. "You're not recovered enough to fight. We're clones. The boss left to make sure you stayed safe. If you'd like, we'll try and help you get to a refugee center. You could help organize the civilians, but you're not fighting." Even if he hadn't warned her not to fight, Hinata wasn't sure she could, but she still planned to try with the help of the clone she was sitting against. She tried to stand up, but even the slightest movement was too much for her. She was exhausted. She nodded to the Naruto she had spoken to, who said, "I guess we're staying here, then." With a little sigh, she said, "I want to be out there." With a small smile, Naruto said, "That's why we love you." She froze, her wide eyes meeting his gentle face. I mean, if that's okay, I don't mean you have to love me back or anything," he stammered, as if he realized what he had said. She could turn and give the clone holding her the exact kiss she wanted to give the original right now, but she lacked the strength to approach him and silence him with a kiss. She would have expected to be crying at this point, but perhaps she was too exhausted or something else. But either way, both Narutos appeared relieved that her eyes weren't leaking water. She exclaimed, "I love you, too." As she tangled her fingers in his blonde hair and touched his mouth once more, she eagerly accepted his tongue when it reached out to touch hers and bowed into him when his arms turned to embrace her more tightly. "I love you," she said again, and he said it back to her. It was the most incredible sound ever. It appeared that the other Naruto was unable to resist, so he pulled her to him from behind and kissed her cheek, shoulder, neck, and hair while whispering her name into her ear. She eagerly met the Naruto's mouth in front of her, their tongues curiously touching, reminiscent of that first time in his room, despite the strangeness of the situation. It wasn't the time for this, and the shouts from outside weren't going away, but it felt great to hear, feel, and taste Naruto right here. With her, she couldn't stop breathing when 4 hands grabbed her in the middle and 2 sets of lips, teeth, and tongues left their marks on her neck and collar. He had stated that he was here, hers, and not far away. He cherished her. Then a silver-haired genin she knew from the Chunin exams entered through the open door, adjusting his glasses upon seeing the 3 of them. "My, Naruto-kun, you don't waste any time, do you?" She flushed and ducked behind her bangs to conceal her face. She was sitting here kissing her boyfriend while an invasion was taking place. Sitting here, she was giving 2 kisses. The way Naruto responded was totally unexpected. "What do you want?" he barked angrily, appearing to be as close to summoning the Kyuubi's chakra as a clone could get. "Nothing of consequence." The genin shrugged. "Your allegiance to Orochimaru-sama." "No fucking way." The genin nodded at Hinata and said, "I figured, which was why I came here for her. It's quite sloppy of you to leave your most important thing unattended by anything except clones. One might question you having any feelings for her at all, but I guess we'll see." The genin pulled out 2 scalpels, which showed a menacing gleam in the white light. Hinata suddenly felt much more exhausted than she had just a moment before. "Motherf." Sasuke was unable to complete his curse before a huge, sandy hand suddenly swung out and slammed him against Naruto, who was delighted to be the cushion for a 12-year-old boy who was anything but fragile and gladly completed his vow on his behalf. Sasuke asked, "What do we do?" As he licked his lips, Naruto watched the raccoon's restless movements. The Ichibi was still getting used to it. That would be helpful to them. Then he focused his attention on the sleeping genin that the sentient sand was holding against the raccoon's head. Naruto stated, "We have to wake him up, and how difficult is that gonna be?" The redhead remained motionless as the tanuki roared loudly. Sasuke didn't require a response. The apprentice sealmaster was asked urgently by Naruto, "Can you hold him in place?" Pulling an ideal sealing brush and an ink tablet from another pouch he had fastened to his waist, Sasuke paused. As long as he could while avoiding flying trees and sand. When Sasuke wasn't there to literally spit fire at them, the rest of Team 7 gleefully referred to it as a fanny pack. Naruto gritted his teeth against the analysis's slowness. He was about 6 years ahead of the other ninja and therefore had 3 restraining designs that could automatically seal a tailed beast on hand. However, the last time this battle had ended, neither sealing jutsu nor Sasuke's skill had been used, and this time, there was going to be some teamwork. In addition to insulting his teammate by suggesting that he was useless, Naruto's sudden removal of the brush from his grasp and use of 3 or so clones to whip out a big-ass seal design would raise the question of where in the hell Naruto learned how to whip out a restraining seal. Sasuke needed to use his newly acquired discipline in a battle. Furthermore, even though this battle was crucial for Gaara, Naruto, and the others, it was not as fierce as the ones Naruto had previously faced, and if the altercation somehow got out of control, it would be simple to break it up with Kurama's power. Sasuke shouted, "Distract him, and try to keep him in the same area." He carefully cut a kunai over the flesh beneath his thumb and poured the blood into his tablet, shaking the ink frantically while trying to stop the flow and unintentionally spilling a few priceless droplets over the edge. Naruto's metabolism apparently allowed him to replenish his blood supply several times faster than any human, so he had never experienced a decrease in performance due to blood loss. However, he imagined it simply added another stressor to the 12-year-old. If this didn't work immediately, there couldn't be enough blood in his body to continue giving him a base for the mixture during a battle. Naruto followed orders, causing a group of clones to appear and charge the sand monster, using the Nine Tails chakra to rapidly reach his limbs and assist him in removing large portions of the Ichibi. Under the pressure of 9 or so Naruto Uzumaki, he reformed, but not quickly enough to leave his position. To the chagrin of anyone who had ever challenged him to a battle of wills, Naruto's endurance allowed him to continue until the end of the week. As Sasuke painted the main portion of the seal onto the outside, he moved between the trees that were still standing and carefully painted down markers that Naruto knew would communicate with one another and work to keep the chakra used inside the seal. After completing his perimeter, Sasuke leapt out. A short distance from one of the trees he swiftly mapped out a seal for restraining someone with a second slice. This time to his opposite hand. Unfortunately, a tailed beast's chakra would be too strong for the amplifier he had used here. However, Naruto could be useful. "What's up?" The Jinchuriki asked, jumping to his teammate's side and leaving his clones behind. I don't have enough chakra. Sasuke, who was pale and obviously upset at the realization that he was now lacking in both blood and chakra and was no closer to completing the assigned task, watched the monster continue to flail. With a chuckle, Naruto called the heir's attention to himself. After exchanging glances, Sasuke understood the meaning of the blonde's smile in an attempt to calm the now very irate chakra beast. Naruto stepped back and pressed 2 chakra-charged hands down onto the seal, causing a third of his chakra to vanish despite their best efforts. The Ichibi were unable to escape the confinement. Sasuke's mastery of everything he'd tried to learn and Jiraiya's sealing techniques weren't anything to laugh at. Now what? Now, Naruto started, then stopped. Hinata, one clone was down, while the other was pursuing a drugged and unconscious Hyuga heiress and a swiftly retreating Kabuto, who was missing an arm. What the devil caused this to go south so quickly? There was no more time for Sasuke to take part because Naruto needed to finish this quickly. He shifted to his all fours and begged Kurama to give him as much chakra as he could. And all of a sudden, Sasuke was alone. He hardly had human features. A frightening amount of chakra, possibly overkill, but he didn't care, was hurled at the Ichibi, blasting Gaara away from the sand. This abruptly broke the connection between Ichibi and host, causing the boy to blink drowsily and with great alarm at the blonde who was blazing out malicious chakra. You're like me, Gaara uttered, his face tinged with confusion. Naruto was aware that Gaara had probably thought he was just another ninja after seeing him around his friends. However, now Naruto said, your philosophy is screwed up, knowing that time was running out, but he had to say it because his clone was still alive and something might go wrong otherwise. Leaving 2 emotionally stunted teenagers together had never worked out well, but Sasuke was improving at the whole, needing others thing. He watched Sasuke rush in their direction and quickly destroyed the Kyuubi's chakra. Loving only yourself, working towards a goal that benefits only you. Don't make me laugh, that's not worth a thing, that's less than nothing. You work for your friends, your family. In the background, Temari and Kankuro are running toward them in a panic. The kunai of an enemy shinobi was on their deadly, violent younger brother. Gaara was rendered immobile after a few more brushstrokes due to Sasuke's appearance, so Naruto left a clone with the quad so he could leave immediately. Konoha was quite a distance from Orochimaru's hideout. In addition to the fox's chakra, Naruto's muscles burned from running so hard for so long. When he arrived, he would have to fight. Although the gray-haired traitor wasn't making much of an effort, his clone had managed to avoid being popped while pursuing Kabuto to see where the spy was heading. After all, Naruto had to know Orochimaru's location. However, the copy was promptly thrown away once they reached the waiting area, and Naruto moved even more quickly because he didn't trust Kabuto around anyone who had fewer weapons than a butter knife. He wasn't even slightly okay with Hinata near him, even with his goddamn scalpels, jutsu, and all of his favorite drugs. He eventually reached them, wind chakra assembling for a Rasengan. The bastard was requesting one, but he hadn't used one since he'd gone back in time. The unconscious Hinata was lifted by the jacket and held in front of Kabuto like a target before he could say another word. A clone and a puff of smoke emerged. Put her down and get away from her. Perhaps because he was missing an arm, Kabuto wasn't as amiable as usual. Come now, don't disappoint us. Orochimaru-sama has high hopes for a second prodigy in Konoha. I hear your abilities were even better hidden than mine. A scalpel emerged from between the fingers gripping Hinata's jacket's scruff. Fuck off, give me Hinata. As the seal grew hotter, Kabuto's eyes lowered to rest on Naruto's stomach. All you care about is her. I must say, I'm impressed. How did you manage to fool the village? Or, are you actually? Kurama was agitated. He told the Snake Sanin's underling, I'm not the Kyuubi, we just work towards a common goal. Why? What goal is that? After taking another puff of smoke, Naruto's clone took the place of Hinata and punched the bespectacled ninja in the face. Well, part of it is keeping Hinata safe. After taking 2 steps back, Kabuto casually swung his knife to kill the clone even though he had stopped the blood flow to his arm. He was in a lot of pain and likely more angry than he could have imagined that he had to try to persuade the little shit who had torn his arm off to join him. His face was pale and his jaw was tight. Naruto pictured Kabuto anticipating a definitive no and repaying the favor. And the rest? With his arms full of Hinata and hardly paying attention, Naruto asked, wouldn't you like to know? The girl was past another clone that had emerged immediately. The double fled to a remote area of the forest. You won't be able to keep her safe in Konoha, noted Kabuto. Orochimaru invaded Konoha for the Sharingan and, sorry, that's not gonna happen, but I'm thinking it'll be a while before you make another attempt. However, Naruto looked up as an idea occurred. He shouldn't be so worried about Sasuke right now. Why is that? Kabuto asked with an unreadable expression. Sasuke's Sharingan won't be where Orochimaru needs it for transplantation for some time now. In that time, a mutual enemy of ours will be on the move. Kabuto said nothing. Akatsuki. Naruto waited in disappointment for an answer. I don't have a problem with Orochimaru as long as he stays away from Konoha and Sasuke. He won't need him for a while, anyway, but Akatsuki's real leader wants something I know Orochimaru wouldn't be behind. I'm willing to work with him on this, but Konoha and Hinata have to both stay safe, Naruto said, creating another clone. Kabuto laughed and said, You're not as smart as I thought you were. He continued to hold his scalpel. You think we'd give you information on us while you're still a part of Konoha? He asked. Oh, the seals were one hand to Kabuto. Nice. Naruto dodged wildly, but it didn't stop two nasty bites from what he was certain was poisonous. Would Orochimaru use anything else? Of course. Snakes. The only thing Kyuubi could do was burn away any remaining poison, which indicated that Naruto was harming himself with his own chakra, which was never a good sign. Kabuto had learned to keep his distance, so he didn't hit him again, but if you knew how to deal with it, this wasn't a problem. There were more clones, dodging, fighting with the snakes, destroying the terrain with wind chakra, and more. Meanwhile, Naruto took out his own ink tablet, which was, regrettably, far less elaborate than Sasuke's, and proceeded to turn the battlefield into a minefield. Too preoccupied with the clones, the Sannin's accomplice failed to notice. He was exhausted, but the fight was perhaps one of the easiest he'd been in since returning, if you don't include the transportation, the clones, the chakra depletion from Gaara, the poisonings, and the panic when he realized he had to charge the seal and then get the hell away before he was barbecued. Even worse, Hinata was still too unconscious to react when he eventually located his clone, and the doppelganger appeared to be about to explode. He wouldn't be shocked if the copy was now maintained solely by willpower. However, it was over. All that remained was to take Hinata and return to the village after Gaara and Kabuto were stopped, hopefully permanently, but you could never be certain with a traitor. But he was exhausted. The energy rushing through Kyuubi's veins was redirected into a warm ball in his stomach, which was also dwindling. He still didn't trust the fox, and it wasn't a good idea to fall asleep near an opponent who was almost definitely dead on the battlefield. So he picked up Hinata. She was usually fairly easy to lift, but his arms were like jelly. Slung her over his shoulder, and started to walk back. Sleep, it purred, I can be alert. He lost the ability to pronounce his name. Half a mile in, he was out at 3/4. He awoke to find Jiraiya standing over him, looking sullen. How's Hinata? Naruto asked him with a wacky smile. Fine, replied the Sannin, but whether you see her depends on your answers to a few important questions. What's up? Sighed Naruto. How long have you known about the Kyuubi? Since I was little, said Naruto. I don't remember when, I just remember blacking out one time and waking up in a sewer. A sewer? It's the seal where the fox is sealed behind this big cage. And how long have you kept in contact with it? Scowled Naruto. I haven't. It just gave me power during the fight today. Didn't want to get captured any more than I did. That's interesting, Jiraiya replied, because just a few weeks ago, you called the fox by a name really cute. Kurama, was it? Naruto blinked. Had he? He was unable to recall. This might be an issue. Why does it matter? He asked, his frown never letting up. It matters because you seem to know what you're doing, and I need to make sure that you do, before anything else happens, Jiraiya replied. What's gonna happen? Naruto blanked. There was no other way for the Hokage's battle to end. They had tried to intervene, but the clones had reported no change. His main worry had been Hinata. The Hokage's dead. Naruto stopped breathing as the lump in his throat grew larger. Yes, Hinata was the reason he was here, to assist her and protect her. He was here to make a difference, though with Sakura's advancements and Sasuke's transformation, he believed he had been on the right track, and his additional experience might have changed the outcome of the fight, but it didn't. Apparently, that was too simple. He could defeat a younger, weaker Kabuto, persuade a resentful demon fox to make a deal with him, and persuade a preteen obsessed with vengeance to stick with a village he, unknowingly, has good reason to hate, but he could never defeat Orochimaru's barrier ninjutsu. He was still far below the Sannin's level, not in the vicinity of Hokage. The clones, I can see what they see. It's part of the technique, he said in a hollow voice. Additionally, Jiraiya added, you left the village. It wasn't difficult for Naruto to let his face turn angry. Kabuto was a traitor. He kidnapped Hinata, trying to convince me to join up with the snake bastard. The white-haired man stroked his chin thoughtfully and said, but you got her back and managed to eradicate a threat to Konoha to boot, by using the Kyuubi's power. Sighing, Kurama doesn't hate Konoha. Well, he hates the Uchiha, but there's only one of them in Konoha, and he's 12. What did you agree to gain access to its power? Naruto hesitated, considered the repercussions. I'm going to kill the leader of Akatsuki, he said. Sasuke asked absently as he finished a storage seal on his arm and deposited 2 kunai into it before moving a wrist guard to cover the ink. Explain to me again why there are 4 people out looking for one person, when one of them is a Sannin and certainly able to handle this sort of mission on his own? You're Jiraiya's apprentice, so you're definitely coming with him, said Naruto. And Hinata's too injured to help repair the village, but not so much that she can't come with us, and the Hyuga needs some time to come to terms with Hinata's badassery, and I want her to come. All right, Sasuke conceded, but you're still left. With a shrug, Naruto said, Jiraiya asked me to. I think it's exciting, Hinata stated. Tsunade-sama is a big deal for Kunoichi. Scowling, I wouldn't expect too much. She hasn't stepped foot in the village for, what, 10 years? I'm thinking she's not gonna be too enthused about coming back, even for the Hokage position. What? Even for the Hokage position? Sasuke exclaimed. With a laugh, Naruto said, shut up. Hinata laughed, but it is strange that we have such a large group, enough to make a genin team. The important thing is, Naruto said gravely before putting his arms around them both and drawing them close, we're safe, we're together, and we're on a glorified vacation from cleaning duty. Jiraiya leaned over the 3 of them and said, don't get so comfortable, brat. Without assisting Sasuke in his escape attempt, Hinata puffed her bangs out of her eyes and appeared content with it, as if she was anticipating a catch. This is a training trip for you, to even the lady's gonna be putting her tracking skills to use. Naruto said, all right, then, let's start training. Taking advantage of the fact that no one had yet to notice that they had topped the hill, Jiraiya made a dramatic sweep of his arm across the vista. Not yet, he said. We should probably at least start on what we're being paid to do, first. Sasuke was able to enjoy the festival's sight as well. The town was busy below them. Sweet swelling barbecue, tiny toys and masks, and exquisite cloth were all being sold at stalls, but everyone was cautious to keep a safe distance in case they spilled anything or kicked up dust on the pricey fabric. Even at this hour of the day, adults could be seen stumbling down the street with spots of color on their cheeks, while children lined up for various games. Naruto had some pleasant memories of this place, and it was the only festival he had ever attended. He had never been a big fan of Konoha's remembrance of the Kyuubi attack. You boys can take a walk, Jiraiya replied. Hinata, you're coming with me. Huh? Gaped Naruto. Jiraiya had ended up in what he was certain was a brothel during his previous visit. Hold on, what are you? Relax, kid, Jiraiya laughed. Information gathering. Your girlfriend's a tracker, this'll be right up her alley. I'd better not find her in some alley. Hinata, don't let him do anything perverted, yelled Naruto, as he frowned downward. Grabbing him by the back of his jacket, Sasuke whispered, people are staring, idiot, let's go. Other than Hinata's slight wave, no one else responded. Whack. Oi, you hear me? Ow. Sasuke, what was that for? For being a moron. But after 4 hours, the Uchiha's perspective was also shifting. Perhaps Naruto's incessant complaining was a contributing factor. Look, it's time to go look for them. You can either come with me or keep bitching, the black-haired boy said, pausing to pick a rock out of his sandal. I'm not bitching, replied the brunette. You wait till you and Sakura start dating. I'm gonna take her out to ramen all the time. You'll see what it's like. With a snort, Sasuke started toward the majority of the bars. Naruto grasped the concept and followed. They soon narrowed their focus to a single stall after hearing a loud laugh, and when they entered, they found a blushing and babbling seal master being cared for by 2 curvy young ladies. Not a Hinata. A vein on Sasuke's neck grew 3 times larger, and the Uzumaki watched. He said sweetly, what was that about them gathering information? A table flew at the drunk before the 2 girls could even get away, spilling what must have been several score bills worth of alcohol all over the place. Naruto couldn't contain his laughter as Sasuke muttered under his breath, get up. We're leaving. Annoying, irresponsible old drunk. I stand up for you and this is what I get. And Naruto? Naruto didn't care that a snobby guy in a dull suit was now fussing over a stain because Hinata, who was 12 years old and still a genin, was standing in front of him in an outfit he would never have seen her in. He had misjudged the size of her bust. Her breasts were pushed up to nearly eye level, and he had no self-control to stop staring. Perhaps it was padding, but he didn't care. Furthermore, he vowed that he had never seen so much leg in his life, and her dress was cut the same as the ones the other girls were wearing. Boobs, he had been staring for a long time, and holy fuck, there was no blood flowing there. At all costs, stop. He nearly tore his jacket trying to wrap it around her shoulders, but he managed to do so, and he was no longer with her. He was standing over a bruised businessman who insisted that his oily suit was worth 100,000. Jiraiya smiled and said, do you catch that, kid? Or were you too busy staring at your girlfriend's rack? Naruto came very close to destroying his own face with a Rasengan. Through a swollen lip, Jiraiya reiterated, "It was for training. What are you complaining about, anyway, brat? Or are you angry that I saw them first?" With great pleasure, Kyuubi charged Naruto with chakra without any kind of provocation, causing his teeth to double in size and his glare at the Toad Sage to turn red. While Hinata, with a face redder than anyone could have imagined, fussed over his other side and said things like, "I'm sorry." Jiraiya was not amused and slapped him on the back of the head. "It's embarrassing. Please, don't bring it up." Needless to say, this made matters worse. The Sannin's ability to incite hatred in everyone was legendary. In less than a day, he had already infuriated the Hyuga heiress, the last Uchiha, and the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed demon fox. As a sign of his frustration, Naruto kept Hinata firmly by his side, her hand in his, and frequently glared at the sage, refusing to let her stand in the way of his relationship with Jiraiya. He had indeed missed him, but this was really annoying. With his hands in his pockets, hunched over, and probably reconsidering his choice to remain in Konoha, where the renowned ninja were all perverts or deserters themselves, Sasuke was up ahead of the group. "Look, it was amusing for a while, but you've gotta start talking to me again," Jiraiya grumbled. "There's that technique I've gotta teach you, the Rasengan." "Is that what it's called? I just didn't have a name for it," Naruto said coolly, pausing to hold his palm out face up, focus, and summon the sphere of quickly circling wind. Had it not been so terrifying, Jiraiya's face would have been invaluable. He asked, "Where did you learn that?" Naruto extinguished the chakra and stepped back into step with Hinata, who was observing him with interest. "What do you mean, where?" he asked. "Once I learned about chakra affinity, I thought I should do something with it." Sasuke, who had fallen back to walk with them after training began, inquired, "Your affinity is wind?" Still annoyed, Naruto shrugged and moved in closer to Hinata, who comfortingly rubbed his thumb over his knuckles. "Each time you enter the scene, child," said the white-haired toad summoner, shaking his head. To his surprise, Naruto grinned and said, "Number 1 unpredictable ninja," to the man with Kushina's signature smile. As he walked forward, the wise man snorted and said, "Come on, Uchiha, some people just can't wait patiently to learn new things, so I guess you and I will just have to catch up." Naruto made good use of his suspicion that the distance was also for privacy between him and Hinata. Possibly as a small gesture of apology and recognition that perhaps he wasn't such a brat, he kissed her below her ear and watched her blush a little. "Are you okay?" she said almost in a whisper. He squeezed her hand once more and said, "Me? What about you? If you want, I can punch that pervert again." She nodded. "It really was just a tracking exercise. I had to fit in with the other girls." "A chance." He planted another kiss beneath her bangs as she ducked her head, saying, "You were much prettier. This next town, let's go on a date. It's famous for its casinos, but I think we could find a nice bakery or something. It would be cool to see if the cinnamon rolls from around here taste." She added, "And ramen," as she bumped into his hip. With glowing eyes, Naruto said, "I love you." With a laugh, she said, "I love you, too." Jiraiya's loudly nasal voice said, "Ah," and Naruto let go of her hand to follow him. Jiraiya's description of Tsunade, including her measurements, was so accurate that it was easy for the group's tracker to locate her within 30 minutes. Hinata had them in front of the woman, and thanks to Jiraiya's slick conversation, the group was led into a booth where Naruto was seated directly across from the Slug Sannin, much to his mild annoyance. He could still see how Tsunade's eyes hovered over him, the son of the bloody habanero and the 4th Hokage, despite her best efforts to conceal her feelings at his appearance. "Come on, Granny, why don't you come back with us? You can keep the hat warm for me," he said with a broad smile. "Brat, you don't know a damn thing about that village. It'll destroy you," she said, her face furrowed instantly. Because he was acting like a brat, which usually meant something interesting was about to happen, Jiraiya and Sasuke were paying close attention to Naruto as he scrunched his face in disgust. "Man, what are you acting so stuck up for? Konoha's a nice place?" Tsunade didn't need to know that Naruto thought, "Nice place," but he also thought, "Still the same prejudice everywhere. Won't let me walk into a shop unless someone of high standing is there to glare them into submission, still." Tsunade became enraged and retorted, "Konoha took my brother away from me, and you're the one who doesn't know what he's talking about." Naruto was becoming irritated. "My gramps died in service for Konoha, too," he complained. "That doesn't mean it's the village's fault." He wasn't sure how much longer he could complain. With a bitter tone, Tsunade remarked, "The Hokage was a fool, and so is anyone who chooses to stay in that village." A thump. Hinata struck the table with her fist. Sasuke and Jiraiya appeared as though they might have added something as well. but their faces changed to ones of shocked surprise when they saw Hinata's expression stony Hyuga. As Hinata stated in a firm voice, "Don't you dare say that," Tsunade went blank. "Don't you dare call Naruto a fool for choosing to give his life to Konoha." The emphasis was clear. He's given more to Konoha than anyone should have had to. Tsunade's breath intake indicated that she was fully aware of Naruto's childhood and, perhaps more privately, that she should have been present, if only because no child should have to grow up alone. Sasuke's lost his entire family, they gave their lives to Konoha. As well, they're not fools. I don't know what Jiraiya-sama's been through, but I can bet that he's felt loss because of his duty. As well, don't call us fools. You know, the kid, he nodded to Naruto, has a point and he's not unimpressive on his own. I was trying to teach him the Rasengan earlier, Jiraiya said, clearing his throat. A brat like that, learn the fourth's technique? Tsunade snorted. Naruto crossed his arms and remarked, well, if he's just a fool, I don't think it'd be too hard. If I do, you'll come back to the village. Tsunade looked at him thoughtfully before shaking her head and saying, no, this isn't something to bet on. I'm not going back to that village. It's destroyed everything to me. From the corner of Jiraiya's mouth, he said, nice try, kid. When everything's destroyed, you have to start building again, Sasuke said, shocking the blonde genin as he gazed at the woman. The Avenger's eyes were darker than normal. It's the only way to get anything done. You want to get something done? Tsunade replied, don't give your life to an ungrateful bunch of idiots. She glanced at Naruto. Look, kid, I'm sorry about what I said. It's fine to have a dream, but I don't anymore, and I'm not sure how you do. Either if you ever need a place to go, outside the village, I can help you out. She walked away. Don't leave just yet, please, Shizune said, leaping in front of Jiraiya after remaining silent up until that point. I'll talk to her. Jiraiya exhaled. I don't think she'll change her mind. After something like that, this means that she'll be put down as a missing nin, for failing to report to duty when called. The Dr. Nin nodded. I know, just give her some time, a week. I'm sure she'll change her mind by then. Jiraiya sighed. It's no problem, I can wait a week. It's a training trip for the kids, too, but if she doesn't change her mind. Naruto's hands were fisted. He had done a lot of things while working for Tsunade. He didn't want to know how his plan would work under the council-selected ruler, but he wasn't sure either Jiraiya would be his best choice if Tsunade didn't assume the role of Hokage. But that wasn't taking place. How could he make her reconsider if he couldn't persuade her by becoming proficient in the Rasengan? Hinata was extremely irritated with Tsunade. She kept a close distance of no more than 2 feet from him during their date, and her hand was vice-like on his. This would have been acceptable if they had been able to enter a closet for 7 minutes in heaven or something, but the entire atmosphere was off. The date consisted mostly of awkward silences and small talk because she was annoyed with the Hokage candidate and he was nervously gritting his teeth about it. Neither of them wanted the date to turn into a trash-talking session. A few kisses occurred, but they were inconsiderate and unpleasant. They ended the evening with a ramen dinner and a quick stroll. He was reminded the following morning that he would eventually run into Kisame Hoshigaki and Itachi Uchiha during this trip. Actually, Naruto remembered that it had been before they had arrived in this town, but thanks to Sasuke's on-the-go training and Hinata's tracking, they had traveled the distance considerably more quickly than before. The sun was shining on the town, making everyone blink in a daze whenever they went outside, and the day was hotter than he would have liked. Nobody else was wearing anything so stuffy, so it was easy to spot 2 figures in black cloaks from a distance in this heat. He just needed to wait from that point on. Sasuke and Hinata unrolled some scrolls and began studying while Naruto leaned back and pretended he wasn't going to have a panic attack because Jiraiya had gone off to try to talk to Tsunade. Without the kids, he leapt to answer the door when it was knocked. Naruto Uzumaki, we would like you to come with us. He felt Sasuke stiffen in the room, but he didn't see much. It would be hard for an Avenger to forget his target's voice. Hinata raised her head in interest. What did he say in this situation? Damn it. From behind the Uchiha, Kisame drooled languidly, this brat's the Nine Tails? Sasuke growled, so near Naruto that he nearly leapt out of his skin. Brother. He could see the lightning character somewhere on the glowing seals, which appeared to be storage seals, but the bandages on the dark boy's hands fell off, and the ink was so bright that it seemed to float off his skin. Sasuke dodged to avoid being fried, but Itachi also did so as more chakra than Naruto had anticipated erupted around him. Electricity danced around Hoshigaki's body as he was blown back after taking the blow head on. When Naruto turned around, he saw Itachi bending over Sasuke, grabbing hold of his arm, and spraining his wrist with a move so simple that no one would have thought to use before throwing him away just in time to dance around Samahada and strike Kisame in the arm. Hinata appeared on Naruto's left side at this moment. However, the normally incapacitating blow had no effect. and the Sharkman batted her away without blinking. Excellent, it was better that she was far away from the madness. Despite using Kurama's power, Naruto kept the chakra to himself and avoided the shark skin at all costs. He simply did not need the sword to suck him dry today, and he would allow it to do so. Each of the 3, 4, and 5 clones jumped the missing nin, but they were all popped as soon as they got close to him. It was straight up combat after drawing 2 kunai. Naruto leapt onto the blue-skinned ninja and proceeded to cause himself as much annoyance as possible. He kicked him in the face, jumped off his sword, and avoided every attempt to quarter him that he could, all without being caught. Itachi tried to assist, but a certain white-haired sage blocked his path. Naruto didn't care that he couldn't hear the conversation because he knew that his last clone's seal would activate any moment now, allowing him to visit the location himself. Inky tendrils from his own shadow pulled him down and bound him in a hear no evil, see no evil seal after what seemed like an eternity, leaving Kisame with nothing to do but wait and roar in rage. Despite the blonde's best efforts to hold it in place, Fox's chakra flowed into Samahata as it was carefully picked up and placed aside, another quick seal preventing the sword's owner from accessing it. Itachi remarked to him, "Impressive that you managed to subdue my partner," as Jiraiya was clearly trying to determine their goal. Sasuke had attempted to attack his sibling again and had been given a face full of wall for it. He lay crumpled up to the side, but Jiraiya muttered something under his breath while keeping his eyes fixed on the former Anbu. Naruto knew that Sasuke had probably just been knocked out and nothing more serious. Which was acceptable with Kisame, Sasuke, and most likely Hinata out. Naruto had the opportunity to reveal the truth. "You were ordered to kill the Uchiha clan by Danzo." Jiraiya blinked. Itachi gave a blink. "How did you find out?"
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.